This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep properly, even though it's been over 4 years since our company retreat to Echo Lake. I keep thinking someone should know what happened to us there, even if no one believes it. I've been hesitant to share this anywhere because it sounds completely insane, but I need to get this out. I worked for Meridian Biotechnologies as a research scientist. Back in September 2019, our department went on what was supposed to be a team-building retreat at Echo Lake in Acadia National Park. There were 7 of us: myself, my lab partner Jen, our department head Dr. Miller, Robert, our security coordinator, and 3 other researchers from different projects. We were all excited for a break from the lab, some hiking, and maybe some drinks around a campfire. The first day was exactly what you'd expect: setting up camp, hiking, cooking outdoors, normal stuff. The lake was beautiful, surrounded by dense forest, and the weather was perfect. I remember thinking how peaceful it was compared to our sterile lab environment. The second evening is when everything went wrong. We had just finished dinner around the campfire when I noticed a strange fog forming over the lake. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lakes get foggy, right? But something about this fog was off. Instead of forming evenly across the water, it was appearing in specific spots, almost like it was bubbling up from beneath the surface. Then these patches started expanding in perfect circles, like someone had dropped pebbles in water and the ripples were made of mist. Robert noticed it too and mentioned how weird it looked. Dr. Miller, always the scientist, walked closer to the shore to observe it. I remember her saying, "This is unusual. The fog is actually warm." She was right. When the fog reached our campsite, I could feel it was significantly warmer than the air around us. I'm not talking slightly warmer. It was like walking into a greenhouse. Dr. Miller estimated it was at least 12 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature. The fog also had this weird quality to it. It wasn't just water vapor. There were these tiny particles suspended in it that seemed to catch what little light we had in strange ways. Robert tried to shine his flashlight through it, and the beam didn't penetrate normally. It scattered and refracted, creating these bizarre patterns in the air. What really freaked me out was how the fog moved. It didn't drift with the wind like normal fog. It moved directly toward our camp, almost like it had a purpose. Within an hour, we couldn't see more than 3 feet in any direction. The trees, the lake, the trails, everything beyond that small radius was just gone. That's when we started hearing the voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe someone's phone playing something. But then Jen grabbed my arm and whispered, "Do you hear that?" Everyone heard it. Voices, multiple voices, speaking in what sounded like a language, but not one any of us recognized. It wasn't just random sounds, it had syntax, patterns, inflections. It was communication, but utterly foreign. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes they sounded like they were right next to my ear, whispering directly to me. Other times they sounded distant, like they were coming from across the lake. When I moved, they moved with me. Then the visual stuff started. I began seeing geometric patterns overlaid on everything I looked at. Perfect hexagons, spirals, and fractal shapes that shouldn't exist in nature. They were semi-transparent but definitely there, like an augmented reality filter on the world. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just tired, but the patterns remained. What happened next still makes me question my sanity. I looked at Jen, who was standing right next to me, and for a split second, her face changed. It wasn't her face anymore. It was someone else's or something else's. It wasn't like she transformed into a monster or anything Hollywood-esque. It was more subtle and therefore more terrifying. Her features rearranged into a face I'd never seen before, with eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing. Then it flickered back to Jen. I gasped, and she looked at me strangely. "What's wrong?" she asked. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. But then Dr. Miller said, "Is anyone else seeing changes in each other's appearances. Everyone had experienced it. We were all seeing each other's faces briefly become different faces. By this point, we were all thoroughly freaked out. Robert, being responsible for our safety, suggested we pack up and get out immediately. No one argued. We grabbed only what we needed and tried to follow the main trail back to the parking area. That's when we discovered we couldn't leave. The trail we followed, the only trail that led from our campsite to the parking lot, somehow looped back to the lake. We tried again, paying careful attention to our direction, and ended up back at the lake again. A third attempt with a different trail yielded the same result. It was as if the woods were rearranging themselves around us. Robert pulled out his compass, and we watched in horror as the needles spun in a clockwise pattern, making a complete revolution every 7 minutes exactly. It wasn't random spinning, it was methodical, precise, as if magnetic north was literally circling around our position. We decided to stay put and wait it out. Robert built up the fire, thinking the heat and light might disperse the fog, or at least keep us safer. We huddled together, trying not to panic, watching the patterns in the air shift and change, trying to ignore the voices that never stopped. Around 4:15 in the morning, I remember checking my watch obsessively. Dr. Miller suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed into the fog. "There's something out there," she whispered. She was right. There were figures moving in the fog. Humanoid shapes, but moving in ways that weren't quite human. Their movements were jerky but purposeful, like stop-motion animation but in real life, and they were all moving in perfect synchronization, like a choreographed dance. They were advancing toward our campsite from all directions at once. Robert stood up and pulled out the handgun he was licensed to carry as part of his security role. He fired a warning shot into the air. The sound did something impossible. As it propagated through the fog, we could actually see it. Concentric waves of disturbance moving outward from the gun, visible to the naked eye like ripples in water but in the air. The sound waves themselves were visible. When these waves hit the figures in the fog, they seemed to disrupt them. The figures didn't run away or fall down. They dissipated, like they were made of the fog itself. And then gradually, the fog began to recede, pulling back toward the lake. By dawn, the fog was gone completely, but it left behind evidence that we hadn't all just hallucinated. Every surface, our tents, our equipment, our skin, was covered in a thin, oily residue that felt slippery to the touch but left no mark when wiped away. Within an hour of sunrise, this residue had completely evaporated. Our electronic equipment had been affected too. Phones, cameras, tablets, they all worked, but the memory cards contained nothing from the previous night. Instead, they were filled with page after page of mathematical patterns, equations, and symbols, some of which I recognized from advanced theoretical work in our field, others completely foreign to me. The most disturbing thing we discovered later was that despite having no cell service during the night, we'd checked repeatedly trying to call for help. Our devices had somehow sent data to colleagues back at Meridian's main servers, not random data, but complex biochemical formulas and molecular diagrams that represented significant advancements beyond our current research. When we got back to civilization, all 7 of us underwent medical examinations. Every single one of us had the same anomaly in our neurochemistry, a protein in our cerebrospinal fluid that hadn't been there before and that no one could identify. It wasn't harmful as far as anyone could tell, but it definitely wasn't normal. The company did an investigation and found reports of similar incidents at Echo Lake every 7 years, dating back to 1984. The incidents weren't identical, but they all involved unusual fog with similar properties and people experiencing auditory and visual phenomena they couldn't explain. The most disturbing part, those formulas and diagrams our devices somehow transmitted during the night, they worked. 3 weeks after the incident, our lab was able to use them to solve several significant research problems we'd been stuck on for years. The solutions were elegant, advanced, and they functioned perfectly. The Park Service now evacuates the area whenever fog conditions develop at Echo Lake, and they've installed environmental monitoring equipment along the northern shore where we were camping. They don't tell the public why, of course. I still don't know what happened to us that night. Was it some kind of contact? A natural phenomenon we don't understand? A hallucination caused by something in the water or air? I don't have answers, just questions that keep me awake at night. I still work at Meridian. We all do. None of us talk about what happened, at least not at work. The formulas we received that night have advanced our research by years, maybe decades. The company considers it a windfall. But sometimes, when I look at my colleagues, I see that flicker again, just for a split second, where their face isn't their face. And sometimes, late at night in the lab when it's quiet, I swear I can still hear those voices, speaking in that unknown language, trying to tell me something important that I can't quite understand. Story 2. I've been trying to write this down for 3 years now. My hands are shaking even as I type this. I'm not sure if sharing this will help, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone here will believe me, or at least understand why I haven't gone camping since. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. Just me, Sarah, Mark, and Emily getting away from our jobs and responsibilities. We'd been friends since college. And even though life had pulled us in different directions, we made a point to take these trips together twice a year. This time, Mark had found what he called the perfect spot, a secluded lake in whispering pines that supposedly had amazing fishing and beautiful views. The drive there took about 4 hours. We packed Mark's SUV with our tents, coolers full of beer and food, and enough equipment to last the weekend. The mood was great. Emily was playing her weird indie folk music that somehow everyone tolerated. Sarah was navigating with an actual paper map because she didn't trust GPS in remote areas, and Mark was telling his usual exaggerated stories about work, normal stuff, happy stuff. When we turned off the main highway onto a dirt road, I remember feeling a little uneasy. The trees seemed to close in around us, blocking out more and more sunlight. Mark assured us he'd researched the spot thoroughly, even though it wasn't on any official campground maps. "That's what makes it perfect," he said, grinning at me in the rearview mirror. "No screaming kids, no RVs with generators running all night." After bumping along for another 20 minutes, we finally reached the lake, and I have to admit, it was stunning. The water was this incredible deep blue, surrounded by tall pines that reflected perfectly on the surface. The air smelled clean and crisp. Mountains rose up in the distance, and the whole place had this peaceful quiet that made you want to whisper. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon and spent the next few hours setting up our campsite. Mark and Emily shared one tent, while Sarah and I had our own. We gathered firewood, set up the cooking area, and hung our food in a tree to keep bears away. Everything felt so normal, so safe. That first evening was perfect. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and sat around the fire telling ghost stories like we were kids again. Emily took photos of everything. The sunset over the lake, Mark trying to chug a beer, Sarah and me laughing by the fire. I wish I had those photos now. They were all on her phone. As it got darker, I started feeling, I don't know how to describe it, like we were being watched. I kept glancing into the trees, but it was too dark to see anything. I told myself it was just my imagination, probably triggered by the ghost stories. No one else seemed bothered. Around midnight, we decided to turn in. The temperature had dropped significantly and we could see our breath in the air. Before crawling into our tents, we made sure the fire was properly extinguished. Safety first, right? That seems so trivial now. I slept poorly that first night. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal animals, nothing. Just the occasional creak of branches. Sarah slept like a rock, but I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps circling our tent. By morning I was exhausted but tried not to show it. The second day started normally enough. We had breakfast and Mark caught a few fish from the lake that we planned to cook for dinner. But as the day progressed, I noticed things were different. The forest seemed darker somehow, even though it was a clear day. The birds had stopped singing. The lake water, which had been so inviting yesterday, now looked cold and forbidding. Is it just me, or does something feel off? I asked Sarah as we collected more firewood. She looked around, frowning slightly. It is quieter than yesterday. Maybe a storm's coming, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Around 4 in the afternoon, Mark went back to his tent to get his jacket. When he returned to the campfire, his face was pale. He sat down heavily on one of the logs we were using as seats. "You okay?" Emily asked, touching his arm. "I saw something in the woods," he said, his voice low. "Behind our tents." We all waited for him to continue. "It was probably nothing," he said, forcing a laugh. "Maybe a deer." But I could tell from his eyes that he didn't believe it was a deer, and Mark wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He was the one who always went first into haunted houses at Halloween. As darkness fell, we all felt it, a heaviness in the air, a sense of wrongness that none of us could explain. We stayed close to the fire, speaking in hushed tones. No ghost stories that night. Nobody was in the mood. "Maybe we should leave tomorrow morning," Sarah suggested. "Cut the trip short." Emily nodded quickly, looking relieved at the suggestion. Mark just stared into the fire. "Yeah," he finally said. "First thing tomorrow." We went to bed earlier that night, around 10. The plan was to wake up at dawn, pack quickly, and get out of there. I remember checking that our car keys were in my jacket pocket before zipping up the tent. Sarah and I lay in our sleeping bags, not talking but both wide awake. I could hear Mark and Emily whispering in their tent, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. I must have eventually fallen asleep because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake to a sound. Tap, 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 like a finger gently knocking on the fabric of our tent. Tap, 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 then silence. I lay completely still, my heart pounding. Sarah was asleep beside me, her breathing deep and even. I glanced at my watch. 2:17 in the morning. Tap, 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 this time from the other side of the tent. "Mark," I whispered, hoping it was him checking on us. No answer. Tap, tap, tap. Now from above, as if something was standing over our tent, reaching down. I nudged Sarah awake, putting my hand over her mouth before she could speak. Her eyes flew open in alarm. "Listen," I whispered, barely audible. Tap, 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 moving around the tent again. Sarah's eyes widened and I felt her body tense beside me. We lay there for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to that sound circle our tent. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse somehow. We waited, straining to hear anything. Footsteps retreating, animals moving, anything. Nothing. "We need to check on Mark and Emily," Sarah finally whispered. I nodded, though every instinct told me not to leave the relative safety of our tent. Slowly, I unzipped the door, wincing at how loud the sound seemed in the quiet forest. We both slipped out, our flashlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. The campfire had died to embers, casting an eerie red glow over our sight. I swept my light toward Mark and Emily's tent and felt my blood turn to ice. Their tent door was partially open. "Mark," I called, louder now. "Emily?" No response. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Look," she whispered, pointing her flashlight at the ground. There were marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged from their tent toward the tree line. Not footprints, drag marks. We approached their tent cautiously. The inside was a mess, sleeping bags twisted, Emily's glasses lying broken on the ground, Mark's flashlight still on but pointing at the tent wall. But no Mark, no Emily. "This isn't happening," Sarah kept saying, her voice rising with panic. "This isn't happening." I grabbed her shoulders. "We need to get to the car, now." We didn't bother collecting our things, just grabbed the car keys from my jacket and ran to where we'd parked Mark's SUV. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then nothing, just a clicking sound. I tried again. Click, click, click. "It won't start," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong with it." Sarah looked out the windows, scanning the darkness with wild eyes. "What do we do? What do we do?" I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. The ranger station. We passed it about 5 miles back on the main road. We have to go there. The thought of walking through those woods in the dark was terrifying, but staying put seemed worse. We grabbed our flashlights and my pocket knife, a pathetic defense but better than nothing, and started walking. Those 5 miles were the longest of my life. We stayed on the dirt road, flashlights sweeping frantically from side to side. Neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? Our friends were gone, taken by something, and we were running for our lives. Several times we heard noises in the forest, branches breaking, a sound like heavy breathing. Once, Sarah swore she saw eyes reflecting in her flashlight beam, too high up to be a normal animal. We just walked faster. It was nearly 5 in the morning when we finally reached the ranger station. We pounded on the door until a sleepy-looking ranger answered, clearly annoyed until he saw our faces. I don't remember exactly what we told him. Something about our friends missing, our car not working. I don't think we mentioned the tapping or the drag marks. Even in our panic, we knew how that would sound. The rangers organized a search party as soon as it was light. They went back to our campsite with us, a different ranger driving us in their truck. Everything was exactly as we'd left it, except there were no drag marks leading from the tent. The dirt was undisturbed. The search for Mark and Emily lasted 3 days. They brought in dogs, helicopters, volunteers combing the woods. They found nothing. No clothing, no blood, no signs of struggle. Nothing. The official report lists them as presumed dead from a wilderness accident. Maybe they went night swimming and drowned. Maybe they wandered off and got lost. Maybe it was a bear or mountain lion attack and the bodies were dragged somewhere the search teams couldn't find. But I know what happened. Something took them. Something that tapped on our tent, that moved without leaving footprints, that disabled our car somehow. It's been 3 years. Sarah won't talk to me anymore. Can't handle the memories, I guess. I don't blame her. Mark and Emily's families still hold out hope they'll be found someday. I don't have the heart to tell them they won't be. I still have nightmares about that tapping sound. Sometimes I wake up at exactly 2:17 in the morning, convinced I can hear it on my bedroom wall. Tap, tap, tap. I've researched Whispering Pines since then. There are other stories. Hikers gone missing, campers experiencing lost time, strange sounds in the night. Most people write it off as urban legends or the dangers of the wilderness, but I know better. Something lives in those woods, something that watches and waits and takes. And I'm only alive because it chose Mark and Emily instead of us that night. I haven't gone camping since. I probably never will again. And if you're planning a trip to Whispering Pines, my advice is simple. Don't find somewhere else, somewhere public, with other people around, somewhere the rangers check regularly, because if you hear that tapping in the night, it's already too late. Story 3. I've been hesitating to write this for weeks now. Part of me wants to forget everything that happened, but another part needs to talk about it, to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I'm not typically the type to believe in the paranormal. I've always been pretty skeptical, but what my partner Miranda and I experienced in that Manchester flat has completely changed my perspective. For context, Miranda was about 5 months pregnant when we temporarily moved into her grandfather's apartment. With the coronavirus restrictions in place, her grandfather had relocated to stay with his sister, leaving his flat empty. It seemed like the perfect solution for us while we sorted out our housing situation before the baby arrived. The first few days were completely normal. The place was small but comfortable. A typical Manchester flat with 2 bedrooms, a lounge, kitchen and bathroom. It was an older building, probably from the 70s, with those outdated light fixtures and that slight musty smell that older places tend to have. Nothing particularly remarkable about it. The strange occurrences started about a week after we moved in. At first, it was just random banging noises throughout the flat. They would happen at odd hours, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes in the middle of the night. They weren't particularly loud, just distinct enough to make us stop what we were doing and look at each other with that "did you hear that" expression. I remember the first time it really bothered us. It was around 11 at night, and we were getting ready for bed when we heard a clear bang from the direction of the kitchen. My immediate thought was that someone had broken in, so I cautiously went to check, turning on all the lights as I went. The front door was still locked, all windows closed, and nothing seemed disturbed in the kitchen. I chalked it up to the building settling, or perhaps a neighbor banging something against the adjoining wall. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the ceiling, other times from behind the walls. We started checking everything, pipes, radiators, appliances, but couldn't find any logical explanation. Then came the incident with the lounge door. We always left it open at night because our dog Mimi would sometimes wander between rooms. One morning, we woke up to find it firmly closed. I asked Miranda if she'd gotten up during the night and closed it, but she hadn't. I hadn't either. It might seem like a small thing, but when you're certain about something and then reality contradicts that certainty, it's deeply unsettling. Around that time, I caught a nasty flu. Thankfully not COVID. I got tested. I was laid up in bed one afternoon feeling absolutely miserable when both Miranda and I experienced something bizarre simultaneously. We were watching some mindless daytime television when this strange buzzing sensation started in my ears. It wasn't painful, just weird, like when your ear needs to pop, but more intense and accompanied by a subtle vibration. I was about to mention it to Miranda when I noticed her rubbing her ears with a confused expression. "Do you feel that?" she asked, and my stomach dropped. I nodded and suggested we turn off the TV, thinking maybe it was causing some kind of interference. The moment I said this, and I swear I'm not making this up, the television switched off by itself. Not the power, mind you. The Freeview box was still on, its little blue light still glowing, but the TV screen went black as if someone had pressed the power button on the remote. The remote was on the coffee table, untouched. We sat there in stunned silence for a good minute. Miranda eventually laughed nervously and suggested maybe the TV had some kind of auto-shutdown feature we weren't aware of. I agreed, desperate for any rational explanation, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. That evening, something happened that I still get chills thinking about. I was still feeling ill, so I went to bed early while Miranda stayed up in the lounge. Mimi, our little terrier mix, was curled up at the foot of the bed as usual. I was drifting in and out of sleep when I noticed Mimi had raised her head and was staring intently at something beside the bed. Her ears were perked up, and she was completely focused on a specific spot about a meter away from where I was lying. There was nothing there, at least nothing I could see. But Mimi was tracking something with her eyes, her head moving slightly as if following movement. Then she let out this low growl, something she rarely does unless she feels threatened. In that moment, I felt a cold, surreal tingling spread throughout my body. It wasn't like goosebumps. It was deeper, like my entire nervous system was reacting to something my conscious mind couldn't perceive. The air felt different too, heavier somehow, as if the atmospheric pressure in the room had suddenly changed. I called out to Mimi, trying to distract her, but she remained fixated on that empty space. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, she suddenly relaxed, put her head down, and went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. I, on the other hand, didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. The following days brought more unexplained events. The kitchen lights began to flicker whenever we turned them on at night. At first, they'd flicker just once or twice before stabilizing, but gradually it got worse. They'd take longer and longer to turn on properly, sometimes flickering for up to 10 seconds. During the day, they worked perfectly fine. Then there were the knocks. Not the random banging noises from before, but deliberate knocking sounds that mimicked someone at the front door. The first time it happened, Miranda went to answer it, but there was nobody there. The second time, I went, with the same result. After the third or fourth occurrence, we started ignoring them, assuming it was kids playing pranks or some weird acoustics from the building. Mimi's behavior became increasingly strange too. She began following invisible things around rooms, her eyes tracking movement that wasn't there. Sometimes she'd bark frantically at empty corners or growl at the hallway when no one was there. Dogs are sensitive creatures, I know, but this was different. It was as if she was interacting with something or someone that was just beyond our perception. One afternoon, while I was out getting groceries, Miranda had an experience that truly frightened her. She was napping on the sofa when she heard the front door open, followed by footsteps in the hallway and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. She assumed I'd returned early and was making tea. The kettle had a very distinctive sound. She called out my name but got no response. When she went to check, there was no one there. The front door was still locked from the inside. The kettle was cold and nothing in the kitchen had been disturbed. Later, she told me she'd initially thought it might be her grandfather, forgetting for a moment that he wasn't living there. Her grandfather had a very specific routine of coming home and immediately putting the kettle on. The sounds she heard matched his pattern exactly, the way he walked, the cabinet he always opened first, even the slight clink of a spoon against a mug, but it was impossible. He was staying miles away with his sister. The incident that finally pushed us over the edge involved Mimi's dog brush. We always kept it on the top shelf in the lounge, well out of her reach. She'd chew it if she could get to it. One morning, we found it lying in the middle of the lounge floor. Neither of us had used it the day before, and there was no way Mimi could have reached it. The shelf was too high, and there was nothing nearby she could have climbed on. Out of desperation and curiosity, I decided to take photos of the rooms at different times of day, thinking maybe we'd catch something. Most of the pictures showed nothing unusual, but in a few taken with the flash on, there were these strange light orbs floating around. They weren't dust particles or lens flares. They were perfectly round, glowing circles that appeared in different locations in different pictures. In one particularly chilling photo taken in the hallway, there was a distinct orb right where Mimi had been growling the night before. The final straw came after about 3 weeks in the flat. It was around midnight, and we were both in bed, though neither of us was asleep. The atmosphere felt charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm. Mimi was unusually agitated, pacing at the foot of the bed and occasionally letting out small whimpers. Suddenly, the bedroom door, which had been ajar, slowly closed by itself, not slammed, not blown by a draft, but deliberately pushed shut as if by an invisible hand. The movement was smooth and controlled. Miranda grabbed my arm so tightly it left marks, and we both sat frozen, staring at the door. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps moving from the door towards the bed. The floorboards creaked in sequence, marking the progress of something we couldn't see. Mimi was now cowering under the bed, something she'd never done before. The footsteps stopped at the side of the bed, right next to me. That same cold tingling I'd felt before returned with a vengeance, spreading through my body like ice water in my veins. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pressure on the mattress beside me, as if someone or something had sat down. Miranda was silently crying beside me, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think clearly. The pressure remained for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity, before suddenly releasing. The door then reopened by itself, swinging slowly until it was back in its original position. We left the next morning, packed our essential belongings and moved in with my parents temporarily until we could find a new place. We made up some excuse about plumbing issues to explain our sudden departure to Miranda's grandfather. It's been 2 months now, and we've since found our own place. Miranda gave birth to our beautiful daughter last week, and thankfully, nothing unusual has happened in our new home. But I still can't explain what we experienced in that flat. Was it her grandfather's spirit checking in on us? Was it something more sinister? Or was it just a series of coincidences and sleep-deprived imaginations? All I know is that I'll never dismiss someone's paranormal experience again. When you feel that cold tingling, when you see your dog reacting to something invisible, when objects move with no explanation, it changes you. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I still find myself listening for those footsteps, wondering if whatever was in that flat found its way to us here. Story 4. I'm still shaking as I type this. I've debated for months whether to share what happened last Easter in Pinewood, but I need to tell someone who might believe me. I'm a detective with the Pinewood PD, Sarah Reynolds, and what I witnessed defies logical explanation. It was April 21st, 2013. Our department was overseeing the annual Easter egg hunt at Lakefront Park, like we'd done for years. Nothing unusual about the setup. Hundreds of plastic eggs hidden across the park, divided into age-appropriate zones. The weather was perfect, sunny but cool, typical Michigan spring. I was assigned to general security that day, making sure no older kids snuck into the little ones area, keeping an eye on the parking lot, that sort of thing. My partner Ben was handling traffic control. We weren't expecting trouble. These community events are usually just a chance to drink coffee and chat with locals. Everything started normally. The mayor made his usual boring speech about community spirit. Parents lined up with their kids at the yellow tape, cameras ready. I remember checking my watch, 10:30 a.m., when they released the kids to start hunting. The first 20 minutes were completely normal. Kids running around with baskets, parents shouting encouragement, the standard chaos. I was standing near the lake edge when I noticed Tyler Madison. I knew him because his dad works in our department, holding something and looking pale. He was just standing there while other kids rushed around him. I walked over and asked if everything was okay. The 11-year-old wouldn't speak, just handed me a golden egg. These special eggs contained gift certificates or small prizes, so initially I thought he was disappointed with what he'd found. When I opened it, my blood went cold. Inside was a small piece of paper with writing in what looked like dried blood. "I see you through the trees. You'll be the next to disappear. Easter Sunday," claims another child. I immediately radioed Ben and called over 2 other officers. The writing was crude but legible. What disturbed me most was that the blood looked genuinely real, dried and flaking at the edges. I asked Tyler where he'd found it, and he pointed toward a cluster of pine trees at the park's edge. We were about to cordon off the area when a woman's scream cut through the air, the kind of scream that makes your stomach drop. Everyone froze. Then more screaming. "My baby, where's my baby?" A mother was frantically running through the toddler section, searching under bushes, behind trees. Her daughter, Emma Collins, 3 years old, had vanished. 1 minute she was picking up eggs near her mom, the next she was gone. We immediately initiated search protocols. I ordered the park exits closed and requested all available officers. Parents gathered their children close while we organized search teams. The mother was hysterical, describing Emma's Easter dress, her blonde pigtails, the pink basket she'd been carrying. My mind immediately connected the threatening note to the missing child, but I kept that information restricted to just the response team. No need to cause a panic about a potential predator. We split into groups and combed the entire park. I kept thinking about that note, "Easter Sunday claims another child," and felt physically sick. 45 minutes into the search, one of our officers radioed in. They'd heard faint crying coming from the maintenance shed near the playground. The door was locked from the outside with a padlock that wasn't ours. The park manager rushed over with keys, but none worked. We had to break the lock with bolt cutters. Inside, we found Emma sitting in the center of the floor, confused but physically unharmed. What made my skin crawl was what surrounded her. Dozens of hollow plastic eggs were arranged in a perfect circle around the child, not scattered randomly, placed with precise spacing in an unbroken ring. Emma couldn't tell us anything useful. She remembered picking up eggs, then the big bunny asked if she wanted to see more special eggs. While the paramedics checked Emma, I stepped outside the shed to call it in. That's when I noticed something behind the building that made my stomach turn. A freshly dug hole about 4 feet long and 2 feet deep, the size you'd need to bury a small child. The earth was still damp, the edges clean. Someone had dug this very recently. I secured the area immediately and called for forensics. Back at the station that night, I started pulling similar cases from neighboring counties. What I found disturbed me even more. Over the past decade, there had been 6 incidents within a 100-mile radius where children briefly disappeared during Easter events, only to be found in locked locations, storage closets, equipment rooms, even a church bell tower. In each case, the children were unharmed but couldn't explain how they got there. I expanded my search to historical records. Between 1912 and 1923, there were 7 documented cases of children who disappeared on Easter Sunday in the region. Unlike our current cases, those children were never found. The last disappearance coincided with the death of a local craftsman named Jonathan Marsh, who'd been questioned in connection with the cases but never charged. The lab results from the eggs came back 3 days later. The hollow eggs surrounding Emma contained traces of soil that didn't match local samples. Further analysis showed the dirt contained pollen from plants native to Eastern Europe. The blood on the note was human, but degraded enough that DNA testing was inconclusive. I reviewed security footage from homes near the park. Most showed nothing unusual, but one camera on Pine Street captured something that still haunts me. At 9:15 a.m., before the event began, a tall figure crossed the frame. It appeared to be wearing some kind of rabbit mask, but not the cute kind. This looked handcrafted, with long ears and a face that seemed stretched and wrong. The figure moved with an unusual hopping gait that wasn't quite human. We tried enhancing the footage, but the quality was too poor to identify specific features. The height suggested an adult, likely male, around 6 feet tall. A week after Easter, I received a call from the cemetery groundskeeper. He'd found something unusual at one of the graves, a USB drive tucked into the soil in front of Jonathan Marsh's headstone. He brought it to the station. I had our tech team scan it for viruses before viewing the contents. What we found defies explanation. The drive contained dozens of photos of children from the Easter egg hunt, including Emma and several others. Some images showed the children unconscious in locations they had never actually visited, like the interior of an old cabin we couldn't identify. The most disturbing aspect was the metadata. According to the file information, the photos had been created 3 years before the event took place, 3 years before these specific children had even been at that park. We interviewed every registered sex offender in the county, questioned the park staff, and came up empty. The case remains officially unsolved. We increased security at public events, installed more cameras in the park, but found nothing conclusive. I wasn't planning to attend this year's Easter celebration. I'd taken time off to visit my sister in Chicago, but something made me cancel my trip. Call it intuition or paranoia, but I felt I needed to be there. The morning of Easter, before any activities began, I went to Lakefront Park alone. The sun was just coming up. The park was empty, quiet. I walked to the area where Tyler had found the golden egg the year before. There, sitting in plain view on top of a picnic table, was a single hollow plastic egg. I pulled on gloves before opening it. Inside was a small slip of paper with the message, "The hunt continues," written in what appeared to be fresh blood. Lab tests later confirmed it was human blood. The DNA results showed something impossible. It genetically matched samples from the Marsh family, despite their line supposedly ending a century ago. I've requested a transfer to another department. Nobody talks about what happened last Easter anymore. The official report calls it an isolated incident with no credible ongoing threat. The parents in town have collectively decided to believe Emma just wandered off and got locked in accidentally. But every night I check my doors twice. I've installed motion-triggered lights around my house. And sometimes when I look out my window toward the woods behind my home, I swear I see something tall moving between the trees with that same unnatural hopping gait. I don't know what's coming this Easter, but I know the hunt isn't over. Whatever has been taking children for over a century is still out there, still watching, still waiting for the next Easter Sunday, and I'm the only one who believes it's real. Story 5. I still can't sleep with the curtains open. It's been almost 20 years, but the feeling of being watched never really goes away. My therapist says writing this down might help, so here goes. It was Easter Sunday, 2003. I was hosting at our Deerfield home like I did every year since Mom got older. The house was chaos in the best way. My husband Dave manning the grill out back, my teenagers Josh and Emma running around with their cousins, my sister Beth helping Mom set the table. Normal family stuff, the kind of day you take for granted. That morning, Emma had been exploring the attic looking for her old roller skates when she came racing downstairs, holding this dusty old Polaroid camera. "Mom, look what I found!" She was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can we use it, please?" I recognized it immediately. My dad's old camera from the 70s. He'd been obsessed with it, always snapping pictures at every family gathering until he passed away when I was in college. I hadn't seen that camera in decades. "I don't know if it still works, honey," I told her, wiping flour from my hands. "And I doubt we can even find film for something that old." But Emma was already examining it, turning it over in her hands. "There's film in it already. Look, it says 3 shots left." I was surprised the film hadn't completely deteriorated, but figured it would just be fun for her to try, even if nothing developed. "All right, but don't get your hopes up." After dinner, when everyone was stuffed with ham and my sister's famous deviled eggs, Emma insisted we all gather on the back deck for a family photo. My brother-in-law Tom offered to take it, but Emma was adamant about setting up the tripod she'd also found and using the timer, like Grandpa used to do, she said. Mom smiled at that, though something flickered across her face I couldn't quite read. We all huddled together on the deck, 13 of us squeezing into frame with the woods that bordered our backyard as the backdrop. The camera made this wheezing mechanical sound as it ejected the photo, and we all watched as Emma carefully laid it on the table, waiting for it to develop. I remember the exact moment when we all realized something was wrong. The image was slowly coming into focus, and there were audible gasps. In the photo, standing at the edge of the woods maybe 20 feet behind us, was a figure, a man in dark clothing just watching us. "Who's that?" Dave asked, leaning in closer. We all looked toward the woods, but there was nobody there. "Is this some kind of joke?" my brother-in-law asked, already walking toward the tree line to investigate. I was about to dismiss it as a weird light effect or a smudge on the ancient film when I heard my mother make this sound. This awful, strangled noise I'd never heard her make before. She was staring at the photo, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her iced tea. The glass shattered on our deck, but nobody moved to clean it up. "Mom?" I touched her arm. "What is it?" She couldn't speak at first. Dave had taken the kids inside, sensing something was seriously wrong. Finally, my mother looked up at me and Beth. "It's him," she whispered. "It's the same man." That night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were in bed, Mom told us everything. In 1976, when I was just 7 and Beth was 5, our family had been targeted by someone. Dad had been taking photos at my birthday party in our old house in Evanston when he accidentally captured a man watching us through the dining room window. The police investigated but never found him. 2 weeks later, Dad caught someone trying to break in through our basement window. The intruder fled, but dropped a small notebook containing observations about our family, what time Dad left for work, when Mom took us to school, which bedroom windows we left open on hot nights. We moved to a new neighborhood after that. Dad installed an alarm system and became almost obsessive about security. As a kid, I'd always thought he was just being overprotective. I never knew the real reason. "I thought it was over," Mom said, her voice hollow. "After all these years." The man in our Easter photo was identical to the one from 1976. Same posture, same way of standing. He'd be much older now, but the similarity was unmistakable. We called the police that night. They took the Polaroid and Mom's statement, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. Just some old woman getting spooked by a coincidence, a random hiker passing through the woods behind our property. They promised to increase patrols in our neighborhood for a few days. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept getting up to check the locks, peek through the curtains, check on Emma and Josh. Dave said I was overreacting, that it was probably nothing, but he humored me and did a thorough check of the house before we went to bed. 2 days after Easter, I was at work when I got a call from the police. There had been a silent alarm triggered at our house around noon. Since no one was home, the security company dispatched officers. Nothing appeared disturbed or stolen, but one of the officers found something on our kitchen table. A Polaroid photograph of Dave and me asleep in our bed, taken from our bedroom doorway the night after Easter. I vomited right there in my office. I remember my assistant's concerned face as I slid to the floor, unable to stand. The police picked me up and took me to the station where Dave was already waiting, his face ashen. They wouldn't let us go home, sent officers to pick up the kids from school and my mother from her house. Everything changed so fast after that. The FBI got involved. They found fingerprints on the photograph left in our house that matched partial prints from unsolved home invasions dating back to the 70s. They took the entire camera and remaining film as evidence. 3 weeks later, they found him. The investigators discovered a derelict house outside Milwaukee, about an hour from us. The place was filled, and I mean filled, with photographs, thousands upon thousands of them, organized in meticulous albums and boxes, family photos. Our family photos, not just recent ones, but going back decades. My high school graduation, Josh's birth, Emma's first day of kindergarten, Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, ordinary Tuesday afternoons, and not just us. There were at least 6 other families he'd been following for years. Some had died off or moved away, but he'd kept detailed records of all of them. The man was in his 70s when they arrested him. His name was Walter Griggs. He'd been a janitor at my elementary school in Evanston. That's how he first noticed our family. In his twisted mind, he believed he was protecting us, watching over us during vulnerable moments, making sure we were safe. They found night vision equipment, telephoto lenses, lock-picking tools, maps with our daily routines, notes about our conversations he'd somehow overheard. He knew things about us that no stranger should ever know. The investigation revealed he'd been entering our homes for years, all of his family's homes, sometimes just to look around while we were out, sometimes while we slept. He'd never stolen anything except photographs he took himself, never harmed anyone physically. But the harm he did to our sense of safety, to our peace of mind, that can never be undone. We sold the house, couldn't bear to stay there knowing he'd been inside so many times, knowing he'd stood in our bedroom doorway, watching us sleep. I checked the locks 3 times every night now. Dave installed cameras everywhere in our new place, but sometimes I wonder if that's just made my anxiety worse, constantly checking the feeds, looking for shadows that shouldn't be there. Emma's in college now. Josh is married with a baby on the way. Life has moved on, I guess. Griggs died in prison 5 years ago, but sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched, like there's someone just out of sight, documenting my life without my knowledge. The worst part, all those moments, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, moments I thought were just ours, private family memories. He was there for all of them, a silent observer to our entire lives. I found out during the trial that my dad had suspected someone was watching us for years after we moved. He never told us, never wanted to frighten us, but he'd installed extra security, changed our routines. He died thinking he'd protected us, never knowing that Griggs had followed us to our new home, had continued his sick surveillance for decades. The case became somewhat famous in law enforcement circles. They call it the Easter picture now. They use it in training about stalking behaviors and long-term predatory patterns. To me, it's not a case study. It's the reason I still can't look at family photos without scanning the backgrounds for figures that shouldn't be there. It's why I can't sleep with the curtains open. It's knowing that for almost my entire life, my most intimate moments weren't really private at all. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I swear I can hear the mechanical whir of an old Polaroid camera, capturing another moment I thought was mine alone. Story 6. I've been debating whether to share this for years, but I finally need to get it off my chest. This happened when I was around 10 years old, living with my family in a small town in the Harz Mountains in Germany. Even now, 20 years later, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Our house was pretty normal, 2 stories plus a basement that had been converted into bedrooms. My room was down there, next to my sister Marta's room, which connected to my parents' bedroom through another door. The layout is important to understand what happened. That night, we'd been at my uncle's birthday celebration. It was early spring, around late March or early April. We got home really late, probably close to midnight, which was unusual for our family. I remember being tired but weirdly wired at the same time. You know how kids get when they stay up past their bedtime. Everyone was exhausted. My parents said quick goodnights, my sister disappeared into her room, and I headed down to the basement. My room always felt colder than the rest of the house, even with the heating on. That night, it felt especially cold. The basement had these tiny windows near the ceiling that let in a bit of moonlight, casting weird shadows across the floor. I should mention the witch doll. My aunt had given it to us a few months earlier, this creepy, decorative thing that was supposed to be a traditional German witch on a broomstick. My mom hung it on the wall right at the entrance to my bedroom. I never liked it. It seemed to float there, watching me. Its face was all wrinkled with this pointy hat and stringy hair. At night, it cast a shadow that looked way bigger than the doll itself. Our region is famous for Walpurgisnacht, the night when witches supposedly gather at Hexentanzplatz, a mountain plateau nearby, to dance with the devil. Adults treated it like folklore, a tourist attraction even, but kids took it seriously. We'd grown up with these stories, and living so close to where it supposedly happened made it feel more real. Anyway, I got ready for bed, brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas. I remember checking under my bed, I always did that, and then sliding under the covers. Our house was dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the refrigerator humming from 2 floors up. I must have been lying there for about 20 minutes, drifting off, when I heard something strange coming from my parents' bedroom upstairs. At first I thought maybe my dad had gotten up to get water or something, but this wasn't footsteps, it's hard to describe, like something on wheels. A rolling sound, but uneven, like when you pull a suitcase with one broken wheel. Then came the voice. Not my parents, not my sisters. Something that sounded almost robotic, but not quite. It was muttering something I couldn't understand. Not German, not English, just sounds that almost formed words, but didn't. I froze. Completely froze. You know that feeling when your entire body tenses up and you can't even wiggle your toes? That's what happened to me. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, my back to my bedroom door. The rolling sound got closer. It moved from my parents' room through my sister's room, and then I heard it at my door. My door was always left slightly ajar at night because I was scared of the dark. The sound paused there at the threshold. Then it started moving again, slowly entering my room. I could feel it getting closer to my bed. I pulled my blanket over my head. That childish instinct that if you can't see it, it can't see you. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. The rolling stopped right next to my bed. I could feel a presence there, standing over me. The air felt different, colder, thicker somehow. And then it spoke, just one word, "So." Not in a normal voice. It was deep, but also high at the same time, if that makes any sense. Like multiple voices layered on top of each other, but speaking in perfect unison. The word hung in the air, like it was waiting for a response. I don't know where I found the courage, but something made me peek out from under my blanket, just a tiny bit, just enough to see. There was a witch standing next to my bed. Not a person in a costume, not something I could rationalize. A witch, tall and thin, impossibly thin, with a face that was both ancient and somehow not human. She wore dark clothes that seemed to absorb what little light was in the room. No broomstick, no pointed hat like in storybooks. Just this entity, and she was completely still, not breathing, not blinking, just watching me with eyes that reflected what little moonlight came through my window. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. We just stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then she smiled, not a friendly smile. Her mouth stretched too wide, showing teeth that were jagged and uneven. I squeezed my eyes shut and started silently praying, something I rarely did, but it was all I could think to do. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone, just gone. No sound of her leaving, no door opening or closing. She'd simply vanished. I spent the rest of the night curled up in a ball, too terrified to move, too terrified to call out for my parents. I kept thinking that if I made a sound, she would come back. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but too afraid to tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? Life went on normally for about 2 weeks. I started sleeping with my light on, which my parents thought was strange but didn't question too much. I avoided looking at the witch doll when I walked past it. Sometimes I thought its position had changed slightly, but I told myself it was my imagination. Then something happened that made me realize I hadn't imagined anything. My aunt and uncle came to visit with their kids, which meant my sister Marta had to give up her room for our cousins. My parents told her she could sleep in my room. They set up a mattress on the floor for me, and she took my bed. The next morning, I found Marta in the kitchen, pale and quiet. When our parents left to take our cousins sightseeing, she pulled me aside. "Did you ever see something in your room?" she asked me. Something not normal. My blood ran cold. Marta was 15, 5 years older than me. She didn't believe in monsters or ghosts. She was the one who always told me to grow up when I was scared of things. I nodded slowly. "A witch," I whispered. Her face went even paler. "She just stood there," Marta said, "next to the bed, not saying anything, just watching me." "Did she say so?" I asked. Marta shook her head. "No." She didn't speak, but I felt like she was disappointed it was me in the bed, not you. We compared notes. Marta had seen the same figure I had, tall, unnaturally thin, with that too wide smile and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. She'd pulled the covers over her head just like I had, and when she looked again, the witch was gone. We made a pact not to tell our parents. They wouldn't believe us, and we were afraid they'd think we were making it up for attention. But we also made another decision. We swapped rooms. Marta took my basement bedroom, and I moved into hers. Our parents were confused but went along with it when we insisted. The strange thing, Marta never saw the witch again, and neither did I after moving upstairs. A few months later, I got up the courage to ask my mum about the witch doll. I casually asked where it came from. She told me my aunt had bought it at Hexentanzplatz from one of the tourist shops there. Apparently the shopkeeper had told her it was handmade by a local woman who claimed to be descended from one of the witches who used to worship there centuries ago. My mom must have noticed my expression because she laughed and added, "It's just marketing for tourists, of course." But was it? I'm not so sure. Years later, when I was in university, our old house suffered water damage from a burst pipe. My parents had to renovate the basement, including my old bedroom. When they took down the witch doll to paint the walls, my mom called me, sounding puzzled. "The strangest thing," she said. "Behind the doll, there's a small hole in the wall. It looks deliberately made, not damage from a nail or anything, and inside, there was a tiny bundle of dried herbs and what looks like a small bone." I never told her what Marta and I had experienced. Some things are better left unspoken, but I did ask her to throw the doll away, not put it back up. She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't question it. To this day, Marta and I occasionally talk about what we saw. We're both rational adults now. She's a doctor. I'm an engineer. We don't believe in the supernatural, not really, but neither of us can explain what happened in that basement bedroom, and every year during Walpurgisnacht, I make sure I'm nowhere near the Harz Mountains, just in case. Story 7. I still get nightmares about that day in Oak Ridge. It's been almost 3 years, but typing this makes my hands shake. I've never told anyone outside of my immediate family, but I need to get this off my chest. I was 19 when it happened, just another bored teenager in Oak Ridge, a town so small it barely registers on maps. If you've ever lived in a place where the highlight of your week is the McDonald's drive-thru, you'll understand why my friends and I were always looking for something to do. It was mid-January, unusually mild for winter in our area. There had been a thaw the week before, so most of the snow was gone, leaving the ground damp and the air crisp. Me, Jake, and Marcus decided to explore the cave system in the woods about 2 miles from town. Jake brought his dog Rusty, and Marcus brought his German Shepherd Duke. We'd heard about these caves from some seniors at school, but had never checked them out ourselves. The woods behind Oak Ridge aren't particularly special, just standard Midwest forest that gets pretty dense in some areas. We packed some snacks, water, our phones, and flashlights. Jake brought weed, of course. That was his solution to everything. Let's go smoke in the woods. Let's smoke by the creek. And now, let's smoke in some caves. I didn't really care. It was something to do. We got to the wooded area around 3 in the afternoon. The sun was already starting to set, but we figured we had a few hours of daylight left. The caves weren't hard to find. They were more like small openings in hillsides than proper caves. The first 2 we explored were honestly disappointing, just shallow depressions in the rock that went back maybe 15 feet. "This is lame," Jake complained, kicking at some rocks. "I thought these would be way cooler." Marcus checked his phone. "There's supposed to be a bigger one further in. My cousin told me about it." We hiked deeper into the woods, following what looked like a path that had been worn down by other explorers. The dogs ran ahead, sniffing everything and occasionally barking at squirrels. It was starting to get darker, the shadows stretching between trees, but none of us suggested turning back. That's the thing about being 19. You don't think about consequences. About half a mile in, Marcus pointed to a depression in the ground. "That's gotta be it." It wasn't what I expected. Rather than an opening in a hillside, this was literally a crack in the ground, maybe 3 feet wide at its largest point, narrowing to about 2 feet. It didn't look natural. It looked like the earth had split open. "You sure this is it?" I asked, peering down. I could see that it opened up slightly once you got past the initial drop of about 6 feet. "Yeah, this is the one my cousin talked about. Said you can fit inside once you get past the entrance." I remember hesitating. Something felt off. But Jake was already lowering himself into the crack, using the edges as handholds. "Come on, don't be a pussy," he called up, his voice echoing slightly. Marcus went next and the dogs followed, whining a bit but jumping down when called. I stood there for a moment longer. The forest had gone weirdly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing, just silence. I shook it off and lowered myself into the crack. Inside, the cave opened up enough that we could stand, but just barely. Jake was already using his flashlight to look around. The space was maybe 15 feet across at its widest, and the ceiling hung about 6 feet high. The walls were damp with water trickling down in places. It smelled like wet earth and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. "This is more like it," Jake said, his voice bouncing off the walls. I didn't share his enthusiasm. From the moment my feet hit the ground inside that cave, I felt wrong, like I was somewhere I absolutely should not be. It wasn't claustrophobia. I've never had issues with tight spaces. This was different. It felt like walking into someone's house uninvited, but worse, much worse. "Guys, I don't like this place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus laughed. "We just got here, man. Give it a chance." Jake was already sitting down on a relatively dry patch of ground, pulling out his weed. "Perfect smoke spot. No one's gonna find us down here." I tried to calm down. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just a cave, just rocks and dirt. But the feeling wouldn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. My skin felt tight, like it was shrinking around my bones. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure the others could hear it. "Seriously, I think we should leave," I said again, louder this time. "Something doesn't feel right." "Dude, relax," Jake said, lighting up. "Have some of this. It'll calm you down." I shook my head. The idea of being high in this place seemed like the worst idea possible. I needed to stay alert. I needed to be ready. Ready for what? I didn't know. I sat down anyway, trying to control my breathing. The dogs had been exploring the cave, sniffing around the edges. Duke, the German shepherd, kept coming back to Marcus, whining softly. Rusty seemed more at ease, lying down near Jake. For about 15 minutes, I sat there in silence while Jake and Marcus smoked and talked about some party happening next weekend. I started to think maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just the strangeness of being underground that had me spooked, and then everything changed. Rusty, who had been lying down peacefully, suddenly stood up. His ears perked forward, and he was staring intently at the crack we'd used to enter the cave. He started growling, low at first, then louder. His hackles rose, and he took a step forward, still fixated on the entrance. "What's up with your dog?" I asked Jake, my voice cracking. Jake called to Rusty, but the dog ignored him completely, something he never did. Then Duke started barking too, both dogs now facing the entrance, the only way in or out. The fear that hit me then was unlike anything I've ever experienced. It wasn't just being scared, it was primal terror. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. My legs started shaking so badly I couldn't stand. My breath came in short gasps. Cold sweat broke out all over my body. "Guys," I managed to choke out, "we need to leave. Now." Something had changed in the atmosphere of the cave. The air felt heavier, colder. The darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights seemed to deepen, to thicken somehow. I swear it was moving, pulsing, like it was breathing. Jake finally seemed to sense something was wrong. He put away his stuff quickly. "Yeah, let's bail. Dogs are freaking me out." We all stood up, but the dogs wouldn't move from their position. They were both barking frantically now, Rusty occasionally lunging forward before backing up like he wanted to attack but was too afraid. And then I heard it, a sound so faint I wasn't sure if it was real or if my terror-stricken brain was making it up. A soft scraping noise, like something dragging itself over rock. It was coming from deeper in the cave, from a narrow passage at the back that I hadn't noticed before. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Marcus and Jake looked at me, then at each other. They hadn't heard it, but the dogs had. Their barking became more frenzied. "Let's go," Marcus said, his voice tight. He tried to call Duke to him, but the dog wouldn't budge. Jake grabbed Rusty by the collar and started pulling him toward the entrance. I was closest to the crack, so I went first, practically throwing myself at the opening. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the edges to pull myself up. As I was climbing out, I heard it again. The scraping sound, louder now, and something else with it. A wet, clicking noise, like someone rapidly smacking their lips together. The dogs went absolutely wild. I hauled myself out of the crack and turned to help the others. Jake was pushing Rusty up, and I grabbed the dog's front legs to pull him out. Then Jake climbed up, and together we reached down for Marcus. That's when the flashlights went out, all three of them, simultaneously. Marcus screamed. It wasn't a shout of surprise or a yell of fear. It was a scream of absolute terror, the kind that haunts you forever. Duke was barking and growling so ferociously it didn't even sound like a dog anymore. "Help me!" Marcus shrieked from below. "Oh God, help me!" Jake and I reached down blindly, our hands groping in the darkness. I felt Marcus's hand grab mine, his fingers digging in so hard they left bruises. We pulled with everything we had, dragging him up through the crack. When we got him out, he was sobbing, crawling away from the opening on all fours. Duke shot out of the crack after him, still barking, then running in circles around us. "What happened?" Jake kept asking. "What the fuck happened?" Marcus couldn't speak. He just kept shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. His pants were torn at the ankle, and there were scratches on his leg, 3 parallel lines that were starting to bleed. We didn't wait around for explanations. We ran. All of us, including the dogs, sprinting through the darkening woods toward town. We didn't stop until we reached the street lights. It took Marcus almost an hour to calm down enough to talk. We were at Jake's house by then, huddled in his basement. Marcus swore something had grabbed his ankle in the dark. He said it felt like fingers, but wrong. Too long, too cold, too strong. He said when the lights went out, he felt hot breath on the back of his neck and heard something whisper his name. Jake and I didn't see anything. Our flashlight started working again once we were out of the woods. We checked Marcus's leg. The scratches were superficial, like he might have scraped it on a rock climbing out. We tried to convince ourselves that's what happened. He panicked in the dark, scratched his leg, and imagined the rest. But I know what I felt in that cave. I know what I heard, and I know that whatever was in there with us, it wasn't human. I've never gone back to those woods, neither have Jake or Marcus. We don't even talk about it anymore. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear that wet clicking sound again, and sometimes, just for a second before I fully wake up, I feel cold, elongated fingers wrapping around my ankle. Story 8. Ivy never told many people about what happened to me in the Colorado backcountry last summer. I'm still trying to process it myself. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake a little. I'd been planning this solo trip for months, 5 days, just me in the wilderness in the Pike National Forest. No cell service, no people, no distractions, just what I needed after a brutal year at work and my breakup with Sarah. I'd done plenty of overnight hikes before, but nothing this remote or this long. I was excited about the challenge. I parked at the trailhead on a Monday morning in late June. The lot was nearly empty. Just 2 other cars. I double-checked my gear, locked the car, and headed out. The plan was to hike about 10 miles in, find a nice spot near water, and set up a base camp. From there, I could do day hikes and just exist. Sounds dramatic, but I really needed to clear my head. The hike in was tough but beautiful. Colorado in early summer is something else. Wildflowers everywhere, aspen leaves catching the light, that impossibly blue sky. I followed the trail until it started to fade, then used my map and compass to find a small creek I'd spotted during my research. By late afternoon, I found the perfect spot, a small clearing about 50 feet from the creek, sheltered by a stand of pines, with good drainage and relatively flat ground. I set up camp methodically, pitched my tent, hung my food bag from a tree branch about 100 yards away, organized my gear. I remember feeling so at peace that first night. The stars were incredible, and the silence was broken only by the gentle sound of the creek and occasional rustling in the underbrush. Normal forest sounds. The next morning, I explored the area around my camp. I followed the creek upstream for a couple miles, took some photos, did some fishing, caught and released a couple small trout. It was exactly what I needed. Simple tasks, beautiful surroundings, and time to think. Day 2 started similarly. I hiked a different direction, following a game trail that led up to a rocky outcropping with a view of the valley. On my way back to camp in the afternoon, I decided to stop at the creek to filter some water and cool off. That's when it happened. I rounded a bend in the creek and saw it, a mountain lion. Not some distant speck, but right there, maybe 20 feet away, drinking from a small pool in the creek. I froze immediately. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. The lion was magnificent, muscular, with that tawny coat that blended perfectly with the surrounding brush. It was bigger than I expected, probably a male. I'd read all the safety guidelines about mountain lion encounters, but in that moment, all I could think was, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. Then something unexpected happened. As the lion finished drinking, it made this face. I can only describe it as a dumb cat face, the exact same expression my house cat makes when he's using the litter box. Eyes slightly squinted, mouth slightly open. It was so ordinary, so undignified for such a powerful predator that it actually broke the tension for me. I didn't laugh or anything stupid like that, but it reminded me that this was just an animal going about its day. I started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the lion, but not making direct eye contact. I didn't turn my back, didn't run. The lion watched me for a few seconds, then calmly returned to the creek. Once I was around the bend and out of sight, I hurried back to camp, heart still pounding. That night, I told myself the encounter was cool, a rare wildlife sighting that most hikers never get. I convinced myself the lion was probably miles away by now. I even wrote about it in my journal before turning in, describing the dumb cat face and how lucky I was to have seen such an amazing animal up close. I fell asleep easily enough after my long day of hiking. But sometime in the middle of the night, maybe around 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. Something had changed. The forest was dead silent. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps circling my tent. Not the random movements of a deer or raccoon, but deliberate, measured steps. Pad, pad, pad. Pause. Pad, pad, pad. I lay completely still, barely breathing. My flashlight was right next to my sleeping bag, and I gripped it tight but didn't turn it on. The footsteps continued around my tent, slowly, methodically. It felt like they would never stop. Eventually, after what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the sounds faded away. I didn't sleep much after that. When the first light of dawn filtered through my tent, I unzipped it cautiously and looked outside. The morning was quiet and peaceful, but my blood ran cold when I saw them. Fresh mountain lion tracks in the soft dirt around my campsite. The prints made a complete circle around my tent. The lion had walked around me while I slept, probably no more than 3 feet from where I lay. I considered packing up right then, but I told myself I was overreacting. Mountain lions are naturally curious. It had probably just been checking out this strange new object in its territory. It hadn't tried to get in, it hadn't shown any aggression, and I'd come all this way. I decided to stay, but I'd be more cautious. That day, I stayed closer to camp, constantly scanning my surroundings. I gathered more firewood than I needed and kept a fire going longer than I normally would. I cooked early and made sure to clean everything thoroughly and hang my food bag even farther away. I found a sturdy walking stick that could double as a weapon if needed. Normal precautions, I told myself. As night fell, I built up the fire and sat by it longer than usual, hoping the flames would keep any curious predators away. Eventually, I had to sleep. I zipped myself into my tent, put my knife, bear spray, and flashlight right next to my sleeping bag, and tried to rest. I woke around 2 or 3 in the morning. Again, that unnatural silence. Then the footsteps returned. Closer this time, slower, more deliberate. Pad, pad, pad. Long pauses between each step. Something felt different about this night. The sounds weren't just circling anymore. They were approaching the tent door. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure the lion could hear it. When I heard a soft sniffing sound right outside the thin nylon of my tent door, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat bolt upright, grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, pointing it toward the sound. Through the tent fabric, I saw the silhouette of something large and low moving away, not running, just calmly walking off. I was too terrified to unzip the tent and look directly, but I knew what it was. The next morning, I found fresh tracks again. This time, they led directly to my tent door before turning away. The lion had been inches from me, separated only by a thin piece of fabric. That was it. No more debates. I packed my gear quickly, barely taking time to eat a granola bar. I needed to get out of there. 10 miles back to the trailhead, I kept telling myself. Just focus on that. I hiked fast, constantly checking over my shoulder. About 2 miles down the trail, I got that feeling. You know the one, when you just know something's wrong. I stopped and slowly turned around. There it was, the mountain lion standing in the middle of the trail about 50 yards behind me, just watching, not hiding, not stalking from the bushes, but standing right in the open, staring at me with those intense yellow eyes. Everything I'd ever read about mountain lion encounters flashed through my mind. Don't run. Make yourself look big. Make noise. I backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact but not directly challenging it. I started talking loudly. Hey there, I see you. I'm just leaving, okay? This is your territory, I get it. But then something happened that made my blood turn to ice. The lion began walking toward me, not charging, not rushing, but walking with purpose, closing the distance between us with each deliberate step. At about 10 yards, 10 fucking yards, I shouted and waved my arms to appear larger. The mountain lion paused, crouching halfway to the ground, tail twitching slightly. It was considering its options. When it took another step forward, I knew I was in serious trouble. With shaking hands, I pulled out my bear spray, released the safety, and when the lion took one more step, I unleashed a cloud of red mist between us. The wind was in my favor, carrying the spray toward the cat without blowing back into my face. The lion retreated immediately, circling off the trail and disappearing into the trees. But I didn't feel safe, not even close. I practically jogged the rest of the way back, stopping only when absolutely necessary to catch my breath. Every time I stopped, I'd scan my surroundings frantically, convinced I'd see those yellow eyes watching me from the brush. I made it back to my car by late afternoon, threw my gear in the trunk and drove to the nearest town before I even took a proper breath. I was physically exhausted but too wired to sleep. Later, after I'd calmed down somewhat, I researched mountain lion behavior. Turns out they sometimes stalk people out of curiosity, testing boundaries and assessing weakness. They're ambush predators. They usually attack from behind. The fact that this one had been so bold, so visible, was unusual and deeply unsettling. It's been almost a year now, and I still have dreams about those footsteps circling my tent. I've gone back to hiking and camping, but never alone, and never in areas known for mountain lion activity. I carry bear spray religiously now, and I'm much more careful about where I set up camp. The thing that still haunts me isn't just the stalking or the confrontation on the trail, it's the deliberateness of it all. For 3 days, this apex predator was studying me, testing me, making decisions. Was it just curiosity? Was it considering me as prey? Or was there something else going on that my human brain can't comprehend? I'll never know, but I do know this. We're not at the top of the food chain out there, and sometimes nature reminds us of that in the most terrifying ways possible. Story 9. I can't believe I'm finally typing this out. I've tried explaining this to a therapist, but they just nod politely while probably thinking I'm having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But what happened to me last October was real, and I need to get it off my chest. Last fall, I was drowning at work. My inbox was a never-ending pit of demands. My calendar was back-to-back meetings, and my boss kept adding quick projects that somehow always took entire weekends. I hadn't slept through the night in weeks, and my apartment in Chicago felt like it was shrinking around me. The constant noise, the sirens, the neighbors fighting at 3 in the morning, I was losing it. My cousin Mark has this hunting cabin up near the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. When I mentioned needing to get away, he offered me the keys. "There's nothing up there," he said. "No internet, no cell service, not even electricity, just you and the woods." It sounded like exactly what I needed. The cabin was basically just a shack. 4 walls, a metal roof, a cot with a thin mattress, a wooden table with 1 chair, and a small wood stove. Nothing fancy, but the isolation was the selling point. Mark gave me rough directions because the place was so remote it didn't even have an address. Take County Road 23 north until it turns to gravel, then the 3rd logging road on the right. Follow that until you see the fork with the lightning-struck pine. Go left, and it's about 2 miles in. I took a week off work, packed my Honda with supplies, and headed north. The drive took almost 9 hours, with the last 2 hours on increasingly rough dirt roads. I remember feeling a weight lifting with each mile marker, each town getting smaller, until finally I was bouncing down a rutted path that barely qualified as a road. When I finally spotted the cabin through the trees, it looked even more weathered than Mark had described, but I didn't care. I was free. The first 3 days were perfect. I gathered firewood, boiled water from a nearby stream, read books I'd been meaning to get to for years, and ate simple meals of canned soup and instant coffee. I slept 10 hours straight that first night, something I hadn't done since college. The silence was incredible. Not the fake silence of my apartment with its humming refrigerator and distant traffic, but actual silence, occasionally broken by wind in the pines or an owl's call. On the fourth day, I decided to explore a bit further from the cabin. Mark had mentioned a small lake about a mile west, so I grabbed a water bottle and headed out. The forest was dense with pine and birch, the ground springy with decades of fallen needles. About halfway to the lake, I came across something that stopped me cold, a freshly cut birch tree. The stump was clean, the sawdust still bright yellow, and the tree itself was gone. Not fallen nearby, but completely removed. I stood there staring at it for a good minute. Mark hadn't mentioned anyone else using the land. The nearest cabin was supposedly miles away. Who would cut down a single birch and haul it away? I told myself it was probably the property owner checking on things, or maybe a neighbor gathering firewood. Still, something about it felt wrong. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe a sound, maybe just the unfamiliarity of the place. The cabin had one small window next to the door, and as I lay on the cot, I could see outside to where the trees began about 30 feet away. There, at the edge of the forest, was a dark shape. It was roughly human-sized, completely still, and seemed to be facing the cabin. I froze, not even daring to breathe. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I finally worked up the courage to sit up for a better look. As soon as I moved, the shape retreated into the trees. Not quickly, not running. It just backed up slowly until the darkness swallowed it. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally came, I grabbed the hunting knife Mark had left in the cabin and went outside to check. There were no footprints, no disturbed ground, nothing to indicate anyone had been there. I told myself it was probably just a deer or my imagination working overtime after days of solitude. But that afternoon, I found something else. About 100 yards from the cabin, in a small clearing, there was a perfect circle of flattened grass, about 6 feet in diameter. Not like an animal had bedded down. This was too uniform, too deliberate, and in the center was a small pile of stones stacked into a crude tower. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and returned to the cabin. That night I made sure the door was securely latched and pushed the small table against it. I lay on the cot with Mark's knife close by, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Around midnight I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Not trying to hide, not sneaking, just steadily walking around and around. I counted 4 complete circles before they stopped, right outside the window. I lay completely still, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Then came a soft tapping on the glass. 3 distinct taps, pause, then 3 more. I didn't look. I couldn't. The tapping continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. The footsteps retreated toward the forest, and then silence returned. When morning came, I was done. Solitude be damned. I was getting out of there. I threw my stuff into my backpack, not even bothering to fold clothes or clean up. I just wanted to be gone. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But when I looked down at the ground where I'd heard the footsteps, there was again no sign of tracks. The soil was soft from recent rain. There should have been footprints. Instead, there was just a circle of flattened grass around the perimeter of the cabin, as if something had been pacing around it all night. I practically ran to my car, threw my stuff in the back seat, and turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. The battery was completely dead, which made no sense because the car had been running perfectly the day before, and I hadn't left any lights on. I popped the hood and checked the connections. Everything looked normal. I tried again. Nothing. Fine, I thought. I'll walk out. It was about 12 miles back to the main road according to Mark's directions, but I could make that in a day if I pushed hard. I filled a water bottle, grabbed some granola bars, and started walking, following the dirt road I'd driven in on. I walked for 3 hours, constantly checking behind me, pushing through growing exhaustion. The thing is, I should have reached the fork with the lightning-struck pine by then. I kept walking and walking, and somehow I ended up right back at the cabin. Impossible. I had walked in a straight line, following the road. I hadn't taken any turns, yet there was the cabin, exactly as I'd left it. Panic set in then. I tried again, this time marking trees with Mark's knife as I went, making deep X marks every 50 yards or so. 2 more hours of walking, and once again, I emerged from the trees to see the cabin. When I checked behind me, the X marks I'd carved were gone. Not just hard to see, completely gone, the bark unmarked. I was losing my mind. I went back inside the cabin because I didn't know what else to do. That's when I noticed it. A piece of wood, sharpened to a crude point, nailed to the inside of the door. It hadn't been there before. It was positioned at chest height, pointing inward, like a stake meant to impale someone entering. I spent that night huddled in the corner furthest from the door and window, knife in hand, listening to those same footsteps circling, the same tapping on the glass. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning I tried to leave again. This time I used the sun to navigate, heading due south no matter what. I ran more than walked, pushing through underbrush, climbing over fallen logs, wading through a shallow stream. After hours of this, my clothes torn, my hands scratched and bleeding, I collapsed from exhaustion. I woke up on the cot in the cabin. I have no memory of returning, no memory of how I got there. But when I sat up, I saw that someone had placed a small birch sapling in a tin can on the table. Its leaves were carved with tiny symbols I didn't recognize. On the third morning, I heard a vehicle outside. I was afraid to hope, afraid it might be a trick. But I looked out the window to see a Forest Service truck parked by my Honda. A ranger in a green uniform was looking at my car. I burst out of the cabin, probably looking like a complete madman, and ran toward him. He seemed startled but not alarmed. "You okay, buddy? Looks like you've had a rough few days." I didn't tell him everything. How could I? I just said my car had broken down and I'd been stuck. He radioed for a tow truck from my Honda and gave me a ride back to the nearest town, a tiny place called Mineral Center. The whole way there, I kept looking in the side mirror, half expecting to see something following us. 2 days later, the garage called to say they'd brought my car in. "Strangest thing," the mechanic said. "We hooked it up to diagnostics, and there's nothing wrong with it. Battery's full, starter's fine. Can't find any reason it wouldn't start for you." I moved away from Chicago the following month. I couldn't face going back to that life, those endless emails, those meaningless meetings. I found a job in Denver, something less demanding, with people who respect work-life balance. But sometimes at night, I wake up to the sound of breathing just outside my bedroom door. I always check. I always make sure the door is locked. And sometimes when I'm driving on mountain roads, I'll catch a glimpse of something moving between the trees, keeping pace with my car. I never told Mark what happened. He still asks if I want to use the cabin again, says it's the perfect place to get away from it all. I always make up some excuse. The thing is, I don't think I ever really left that place, or maybe something from there never really left me. Story 10. I still get chills writing this. It's been 15 years since we left that house on Glenwood Avenue in Owasso, but I swear sometimes I still wake up feeling something tugging at my blankets. My name's Charlotte. I was just a little kid when my mom Pat fell on hard times with my stepdad Butch. We ended up moving into my grandmother Emily's old place, this 2-story house right by Rosevere Park. Mom always said it was a blessing that Grandma Emily offered us the house when our blended family needed somewhere to go. 6 kids and 2 adults crammed into one house was tough, but we made it work, at least until, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The first few weeks were normal. It was just an old house with creaky floors and drafty windows, nothing unusual. But then, weird stuff started happening. My stepsister Sandy and I shared a bedroom upstairs, and we both started noticing things, At first, it was just feeling like someone was watching us. You know that sensation when the hairs on your neck stand up? Then we started seeing these eyes. I remember the first time clearly. It was around 10 at night, and Sandy and I were supposed to be asleep. I was lying there staring at the ceiling when I felt Sandy grab my arm. "Charlotte," she whispered, "look at the closet." I turned my head and nearly pissed myself. 2 red dots, like eyes, were visible in the darkness of our partially open closet door. They weren't reflecting light, they were glowing on their own. We both froze, afraid to move or scream. After what felt like forever, they just disappeared, blinked out. The next morning, we told Mom and Butch. They checked the closet, found nothing, and told us it was probably just headlights from the street reflecting off something. But our window faced the backyard, not the street. Those eyes showed up almost every night after that. Sometimes they'd just watch us. Other times they'd move around the closet. Sandy and I started sleeping with the lights on, but that only made it worse because then we could see the closet door slowly opening by itself. Mom later admitted that Grandma Emily had experienced weird things too. She'd wake up feeling phantom cat footsteps on her bed, patting around and making little depressions in the mattress, but she never had pets. Her blankets would get yanked off in the middle of the night, and she constantly complained about hearing water running in the bathroom at all hours. But when she'd check, the taps would be bone dry. Then there were the hairs. This was probably the creepiest thing for me. There was this spot near the staircase where the drywall was crumbling a bit. One day I noticed something strange poking out of it. When I looked closer, I realized they were long black hairs, like human hairs, growing right out of the wall. Not just 1 or 2, dozens of them. I called Mom over, and she pulled on one. It kept coming out about 8 inches long. She yanked it free and examined it with this horrified look on her face. "It's hair," she whispered. "Human hair." We all avoided that spot after that, but every few days more hairs would appear. Butch tried patching the wall, but they'd just push through the fresh plaster. I've read enough stories online to know people might think we were making this up or that there's some logical explanation, but I swear on everything I care about this happened, and it gets worse. When I was between 2 and 3 years old, before we moved out the first time, Mom says I would scream bloody murder in certain parts of the house. I'd point at empty corners and cry uncontrollably. I don't remember this, but Mom says I would babble about the dark man who was watching me. This happened so often that they avoided bringing me into certain rooms. As I got older, I started seeing them too, large black figures that would stand in doorways or at the end of hallways. They weren't just shadows. They had mass to them, like someone draped in a black cloak. Sometimes they'd move, sliding along the walls or ceiling. Other times they'd just stand there, watching. The basement was the worst. None of us kids would go down there alone. It had this heavy feeling, like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. There was this one corner where it felt colder than the rest of the room, even in summer. We later found out from neighbors that a man had hanged himself down there years before Grandma Emily bought the place. After about a year, things got so bad that we moved out. Mom and Butch found a rental across town, and for a while, everything was normal again. No eyes, no hairs, no shadow people, just normal kid problems. But then, 5 years later, the rental's owner decided to sell, and we couldn't afford to buy it. With no other options, we ended up back at the house on Glenwood Avenue. I was 12 by then and terrified to go back, but Mom assured us things would be different. She had a priest come bless the house before we moved in. For a few weeks, it seemed to work. Then the physical stuff started. It began with objects moving. We'd put something down and turn around to find it somewhere else. Keys would vanish, only to reappear in weird places like inside the freezer or under sofa cushions. The TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, always to static. Then came the noises, footsteps upstairs when everyone was downstairs, whispering that seemed to come from inside the walls. Sometimes we'd hear a child laughing, but none of the younger kids were around. But the incident with Mom was what finally broke us. She was sitting on the edge of her bed one night, waiting for Butch to come home from his late shift. She was just sitting there, reading a magazine with her feet flat on the floor, when she felt something grab her ankle from under the bed, not just touch, grab and squeeze. She said it felt like a hand with long fingers that wrapped all the way around her ankle and squeezed so hard it left bruises. 5 distinct finger-shaped bruises. She screamed and jumped up, then forced herself to look under the bed. Nothing was there. Absolutely nothing. Not even enough space for someone to hide. When Butch got home and saw the bruises, he checked every inch of the house. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. No one could have gotten in. That same night, I woke up to pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. Through the darkness, I could make out a figure leaning over me, a black silhouette with no features except those same glowing red eyes. I thought I was going to die right there. Then suddenly it was gone, and I could breathe again. I ran to my parents' room in hysterics. We moved out the next day. Just packed what we could carry and went to a motel. Butch went back with some friends to get the rest of our stuff later. He said the whole time they were there, they kept hearing banging from different parts of the house, like someone was hitting the walls with a hammer. They finished in record time. We found out later that Grandma Emily's house had a reputation in the neighborhood. Before us, there had been 3 different families who'd moved out within months. After us, the place was rented out several more times, but no one stayed longer than a few weeks. Eventually, some new owners bought it and had it blessed by multiple religious figures, a priest, a rabbi, and even some kind of spiritual cleanser. I don't know if it worked. What I do know is that Rosevere Park and Woods, which backs up to the property, has its own history of strange occurrences. Local kids tell stories about voices coming from the trees and apparitions on the walking trails. Some believe whatever was in our house had a connection to something older in those woods. I'm 30 now with my own family, and I still can't explain what happened in that house. The rational part of me wants to believe there were logical explanations, bad wiring, foundation issues, overactive imaginations, but then I remember those eyes in the closet, the hairs growing from the wall, the bruises on my mom's ankle in the perfect shape of fingers. Sometimes I drive by the old place when I visit Owasso. New family lives there now. They've painted it a different color, added a deck. Looks normal. I wonder if they know. I wonder if they've seen the eyes, felt the tugging on their blankets at night, or found long black hairs growing from their walls. I wonder if they've felt something grab them from underneath the bed. Story 11. I still can't believe we found our dream home for such a reasonable price. After months of searching, my husband Marcus and I stumbled upon this beautiful 1920s craftsman-style house in Oak Ridge neighborhood. The real estate market had been brutal for first-time buyers like us, but somehow this gem had been overlooked. Looking back now, I understand why. We'd been married just 6 months when we moved in. The excitement of starting our life together in our very own place was overwhelming. The house had so much character. Original hardwood floors, built-in cabinets with stained glass, a brick fireplace in the living room. Everything about it felt perfect, almost too perfect. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had maintained it beautifully before downsizing to a condo. The first few days were exhausting, but wonderful. We unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and celebrated with takeout on the floor of our new dining room. I remember feeling so content, like everything in my life was finally falling into place. Marcus kept saying how lucky we were. If only we'd known what was waiting for us. It was on our 5th day in the house when we found it. We were exploring the upstairs more thoroughly, discussing where to hang family photos. The upstairs hallway was lined with doors. Our bedroom, the guest room, the bathroom, and a small home office. But that afternoon, as I was measuring wall space, I noticed something odd about the antique cabinet at the end of the hall. "Marcus, does this cabinet look centered to you?" I asked, stepping back to get a better view. He came up beside me, frowning slightly. "Not really. It's like someone pushed it too far to the right." Curious, we decided to move it. The heavy oak cabinet didn't budge easily, but once we managed to slide it a few feet, we both froze. Behind it was a narrow door, painted the same cream color as the walls, with an old brass doorknob that had tarnished almost black. Was this on the floor plan? Marcus asked, his voice suddenly quiet. I shook my head. I don't remember seeing it. Maybe it's just a closet they didn't bother mentioning. Neither of us reached for the knob right away. There was something unsettling about finding a hidden door, like we were intruding on a secret we weren't meant to discover, but curiosity won out, and Marcus turned the knob. The door opened with a long, pained creak. Behind it was a small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a single window covered by faded yellow curtains. The air that rushed out was unnaturally cold and smelled musty, like old books and something else I couldn't identify. Something unpleasant. It's freezing in here, I whispered, rubbing my arms as goosebumps formed. Marcus stepped in first. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The room was completely empty except for a layer of dust and cobwebs in the corners. Something about it felt wrong. The dimensions seemed slightly off, like the angles weren't quite right. And despite the window, the room was much darker than it should have been on a sunny afternoon. Why would they hide this room? Marcus wondered, running his hand along the wall. It could be a nice reading nook or something, but I couldn't imagine spending time in there. My heart was racing, and I felt lightheaded. Let's go, I said, backing into the hallway. We can deal with it later. Marcus gave me a strange look, but followed me out. We closed the door and pushed the cabinet partly back in front of it, not completely covering it, but enough that it wasn't immediately visible. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I drifted off, I'd jerk awake, certain I'd heard something. Footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a door, whispers just too quiet to make out. Marcus slept soundly beside me, and I tried to convince myself it was just new house nerves. The next morning, I didn't mention my restless night. We had a busy day ahead, hanging curtains and organizing the kitchen. But as we worked, I kept finding myself distracted, my eyes drifting toward the stairs, thinking about that room. Around mid-afternoon, Marcus brought it up. Should we clean out that room we found? Maybe paint it? I felt my stomach tighten. I don't know. Something about it feels off to me. He laughed lightly. It's just dusty and neglected. Nothing a good cleaning won't fix. But it wasn't just the dust. There was something about that room that made me deeply uneasy. Still, I didn't want to seem irrational, so I agreed to help him clean it the next day. That night, the noises were louder. I wasn't imagining them. As we sat watching TV downstairs, I heard distinct footsteps overhead, right where that room would be. Marcus heard them too. I could tell by the way he tensed up beside me. Probably just the house settling, he said, but he turned the TV volume up. Later in bed, we both lay awake listening. The footsteps had stopped, but occasionally we'd hear a door creak or what sounded like a whispered conversation. Old houses make weird noises, Marcus said, but his voice wavered. Around 3 a.m, I woke up freezing cold. The bedroom door, which we'd closed before going to bed, was wide open, and the hallway outside was much darker than it should have been. The nightlight we'd plugged in was out. Marcus, I whispered, shaking him awake. The door's open. He sat up groggily, then went completely still, his eyes fixed on something in the doorway, and his face drained of color. Slowly, I turned to look. There, in the darkness of our doorway, stood a tall, shadowy figure. It was darker than the darkness around it, a human shape but somehow wrong, too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly distorted. It didn't move, it just stood there, watching us. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel its attention, like a physical weight pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My body was frozen in terror. Marcus's hand found mine under the covers and squeezed so hard it hurt. We stared at the figure and it stared back. Then I blinked and it was gone, just empty darkness where it had stood. Did you see that? Marcus's voice was barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. Neither of us slept the rest of the night. We turned on all the lights and sat huddled together until dawn, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. In the morning light, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a shadow from a passing car. Maybe we were both overtired and had hallucinated, but deep down, we knew better. We need to look into the history of this house, Marcus said over untouched breakfasts. I agreed, but first I needed to get out of there. Let's stay at a hotel tonight, just to clear our heads. We packed overnight bags and left by noon. The whole time we were getting ready, I felt watched. The hallway seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper, and though we'd closed the door to that room, I swore I could feel cold air seeping out from under it as we passed. At the hotel, we started researching. Marcus contacted our real estate agent while I searched online for any history of our house. The agent claimed to know nothing unusual about the property but gave us the contact information for the previous owners, the Millers, who had moved to a retirement community about 20 miles away. They agreed to meet us for coffee the next day. Mrs. Miller looked troubled when we mentioned the room. "You found it," she said quietly. "We hoped no one would." Mr. Miller put his hand over hers. "We should have disclosed it. I'm sorry." They told us they'd discovered the room shortly after moving in 15 years ago. Strange things had happened. Items moving, unexplained noises, cold spots. Then they started seeing the figure. At first, just glimpses, then more substantial appearances. Their adult children refused to visit. Their dog wouldn't go upstairs. "We tried having it blessed," Mrs. Miller said. "We tried having mediums come in. Nothing helped, so we sealed it off and pretended it wasn't there." "What is it?" I asked. "A ghost?" Mr. Miller shook his head. "We don't know. No one died in the house, as far as the records show. But that room, it's like it doesn't belong. Like it wasn't part of the original house." They apologized for not warning us and offered to buy the house back, but at a significant loss to us. We thanked them and left, more confused and frightened than before. "What do we do?" I asked Marcus as we drove back to the hotel. "We can't afford to sell at a loss. We put everything we had into this house." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "We confront it." "What? Are you insane?" "This is our home," he said firmly. "Whatever this thing is, it doesn't have the right to drive us out. We need to face it head on." I thought he was crazy, but I was also desperate. We couldn't keep staying in hotels, and the thought of living with that presence was unbearable. So we made a plan. The next evening, we returned to the house armed with sage bundles, salt, and printouts of various protection prayers from different religions. Neither of us was particularly spiritual, but we were willing to try anything. The house felt different when we entered. Colder, darker somehow, despite the setting sun streaming through the windows. We turned on all the lights and stood at the bottom of the stairs. "Ready?" Marcus asked, taking my hand. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We climbed the stairs slowly, the wood creaking beneath our feet. The hallway seemed to stretch before us, the cabinet and door at the end receding like in a nightmare. When we finally reached it, Marcus pushed the cabinet completely aside. The door behind it seemed to have darkened, the paint now a dingy gray instead of cream. Marcus reached for the knob, but I stopped him. "Together," I said. We turned the knob and pushed the door open. The cold that rushed out was arctic, burning my lungs as I gasped. The room beyond was darker than before, the faded curtains now drawn back to reveal a window that showed nothing but blackness, despite the fact that it was still daylight outside, and in the corner stood the figure. It was more defined now, less a shadow and more a silhouette of a person. Tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long. It had no features I could make out, just a darker patch where a face should be. But I could feel its hostility, its resentment at our presence. Marcus stepped forward, his hand gripping mine so tight I could feel my bones grinding together. "This is our home," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "You don't belong here anymore." The figure seemed to grow taller, stretching toward the ceiling. The temperature dropped further, and I heard what sounded like whispering coming from all around us. Not words I could understand, but angry, hissing sounds that made my skin crawl. Marcus continued, louder now. "We aren't afraid of you. We won't be driven out. This is our home now, not yours." I found my voice then. "You need to leave," I said, and was shocked at how calm I sounded when inside I was screaming. The whispering grew louder, and the figure seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like it was breathing. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. Then Marcus stepped fully into the room, pulling me with him, and began reciting one of the prayers we'd brought. I joined in, our voices gaining strength together. We moved around the room, Marcus spreading salt along the baseboards while I waved burning sage. The figure remained in the corner, but as we continued, it seemed to lose some of its substance, becoming more transparent. The room began to warm slightly, the oppressive feeling lessened, the whispering faded. "Go," Marcus said one final time. "You don't belong here anymore." And slowly, so slowly, I wasn't sure it was really happening at first, the figure began to fade. It didn't disappear all at once. It was more like it was being erased bit by bit, from the edges inward. The last to go was that dark patch where its face should have been. As it finally vanished completely, the room suddenly brightened, as if a cloud had passed from in front of the sun. Through the window I could see our backyard, normal in the evening light. We stood there breathing hard, hardly able to believe what had just happened. The room felt different, still old and dusty, but now just a normal room, with normal dimensions and normal shadows. We've been living in the house for 3 months now. We cleaned out the room and turned it into a small library. Most days it feels completely normal, but sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I hear faint footsteps upstairs. And occasionally, when Marcus passes that room, he says he feels a slight chill. We don't talk about the figure anymore. We've convinced ourselves we drove it away. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up and stare at our bedroom door, half expecting to see that tall, dark shape watching us again. So far, it hasn't returned. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still here somewhere, hiding in the shadows, waiting. I don't think we defeated it. I think we just made it angry. Story 12. I didn't sign up for this. 8 years with the SAPD, making detective 2 years ago, and now I'm typing this on a burner laptop at a motel outside Corpus Christi because I don't trust my own devices anymore. I don't trust anything electronic. I don't even trust my own memory. It started in March 2016. I was working late in the precinct, catching up on paperwork for the Alvarez homicide. Everyone thinks detective work is all action and interrogations, but it's mostly documentation. I was the only one in the surveillance room that night, Tuesday, March 15th, running back footage to verify a witness statement. That's when I noticed it. Our department had just upgraded to a new integrated security system 3 months prior. It was supposed to be state-of-the-art with facial recognition and automated logging. I was scrolling through the camera directory when I saw a feed labeled B7 corridor. Thing is, we didn't have a camera in the B7 corridor. Budget cuts meant we only had cameras at the main entrances and the evidence lockup in that section. I clicked on it anyway, thinking maybe they'd installed one during maintenance without updating the floor plans. The feed showed the hallway perfectly, better than our other cameras, with a crystal clear view of Officer Mendez walking through, checking his phone. What made my skin crawl was the angle. The feed was from ceiling height, but there was no mounting point there. No junction box, no wiring conduit. Nothing. I switched to other feeds and found 3 more cameras that shouldn't exist. One showed the parking garage from an impossible corner where 2 walls met. Another displayed the interior of the break room from what seemed like inside the vending machine. The third showed the outside of the building from across the street, but we didn't have exterior cameras on that block. That's when I noticed something else. All the officers' faces in these phantom feeds were obscured, not by static or blurring, but by their badge numbers, floating over their faces like some creepy augmented reality filter. And the timestamps were all wrong. They showed exactly 24 hours ahead. I thought it was a glitch, or maybe someone's idea of a prank. I took screenshots and made notes, planning to talk to IT in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, the IT guy, Rodriguez, looked at me like I was crazy. The feeds I'd documented weren't in the system anymore. But that afternoon, everything I'd seen in the future footage happened exactly as shown. Mendez was in that hallway, checking his phone at that exact time. The conversations in the break room played out word for word as I'd seen them. It felt like watching a replay of something I'd already witnessed. I might have convinced myself I was just tired and imagining things, except Torres came to me 2 days later. Michael Torres is a good cop, solid patrol officer, not the type to get rattled easily. He pulled me aside, looking like he hadn't slept. "Reyes," he said, using my last name like we always did at work. "Something weird is happening with my laptop." He showed me his department-issued computer. It was open to case files he swore he'd never accessed, cold cases from the 90s, personnel files of other officers, psychological evaluations. Some of this stuff was supposed to be on secure servers, air-gapped systems that couldn't be accessed remotely. "The activity logs say I accessed these at 3 in the morning yesterday," he said. "I was home with my wife. We were watching Netflix until midnight, then went to bed." I believed him. Torres wasn't tech-savvy enough to fake logs, and he had no reason to lie. We checked the building entry logs. He hadn't badged in during those hours. By March 22nd, 7 days after I first noticed the phantom cameras, 43 officers had reported similar incidents. Peters found his body camera had activated while he was showering at home. Chen discovered her patrol car's computer displaying real-time GPS coordinates of her daughter's preschool. Rodriguez from IT received an automated voicemail that used his own voice to deliver a message about Surveillance Protocol 0 and the inevitable observation loop. The department tried to keep it quiet. Internal investigation, no media. They brought in outside tech consultants who found nothing wrong with our systems, but things kept escalating. On March 28th, I was reviewing normal security footage, trying to track down who might be behind this, when I saw myself enter the server room at 3:33 in the morning. The figure used my keycard, entered my access code, and moved with my walk. But I'd been home that night. My husband confirmed it. My phone's location history confirmed it. My fitness tracker showed I'd been asleep. The footage showed me disconnecting something from the main server bank and plugging in a device I didn't recognize. When confronted by the captain, I had no memory of doing this. They found nothing missing or added to the servers. They even sent me for a medical exam, which confirmed I couldn't have been in 2 places at once. I wasn't the only one. Within days, 5 other officers appeared in security footage doing things they had no memory of. Always at night, always alone, always interacting with the surveillance system somehow. The worst part, when they checked the server room the next day, they found no trace of the device I'd supposedly connected, but the cameras showed it still there. It existed in the surveillance system, but not in reality. By early April, people were breaking down. Alvarez took a leave of absence after his body camera footage showed his kids sleeping when the camera was supposedly locked in his locker at the station. Mendez quit after surveillance footage from his home security system showed someone with his face, but entirely black eyes, staring into his bedroom camera for 6 hours straight. The crisis peaked on April 17th. I was at my desk when every screen in the precinct went black simultaneously. Computers, phones, the wall-mounted TVs in the briefing room, everything. Then they all came back on showing the same thing. Live feeds from officers' body cameras. Each camera showed the officer looking at a screen, which showed them looking at a screen, which showed them looking at a screen, an infinite loop of watchers watching themselves being watched. I saw myself on my computer screen, from the perspective of a body camera I wasn't wearing, looking terrified at my computer screen, which showed me looking terrified on and on forever. The screen stayed like that for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. I know because I timed it on my analog wristwatch, the only clock I trusted anymore. When they reset, everything seemed normal, except everyone in the building was standing exactly where the cameras had shown them. That's when Homeland Security stepped in. They quarantined the building, confiscated all electronics, and debriefed everyone. They classified it as a potential national security threat and swore us to secrecy. Their technicians discovered something that still makes my stomach turn. All our surveillance equipment contained hidden chipsets that weren't on any manufacturer specs. tiny components embedded during manufacturing that created a parallel surveillance network operating beneath the official one. They couldn't determine who had placed them there or how they operated. The components seemed to function autonomously, with no clear command structure or communication protocol. One technician told me off the record that the technology was beyond current commercial capabilities. I stuck it out for 2 more months. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing surveillance footage in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, my phone screen when it was turned off. Footage of myself doing things I had no memory of doing, entering rooms I'd never been in, having conversations with people who later insisted we'd never spoken. I resigned in June. Left San Antonio altogether, changed my phone, my email, my social media, but it hasn't stopped. Last week I saw myself in the reflection of my coffee maker. Not my reflection. Footage of myself, from a high angle, standing in my new kitchen, looking at my coffee maker. I turned around. No camera. Nothing that could have captured that angle. The timestamp on the reflection showed tomorrow's date. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what happened, what's still happening. The SAPD installed new security protocols, swept for bugs, replaced equipment. But I still have friends there. The night shift still reports cameras activating without authorization. Screens still occasionally show empty rooms where shadowy figures in police uniforms stand watching. Always watching. I don't know if it was a hack, a government experiment gone wrong, or something else entirely. All I know is, once you've been seen by the system, it never stops seeing you. Even when you think you're alone, you're being observed. Tomorrow, I'm leaving this motel. Heading somewhere without cameras, without networks, somewhere I can disappear. But I keep thinking about that timestamp from the coffee maker, tomorrow's date. Whatever I do tomorrow, it's already been seen, already been recorded, already part of the loop. Maybe that's why I'm in this motel room typing this warning, because somewhere, somehow, I already saw myself doing it. Story 13. I've always been a cat person. Dogs are great, but they're too needy, too demanding of attention. Cats do their own thing, and I respect that independence. That's why I adopted Milo 3 years ago from the local shelter, a goofy orange tabby who seemed to trip over his own paws and made me laugh with his antics. Milo was never graceful. He'd jump onto the kitchen counter and send my coffee mug flying, or get tangled in the curtains trying to climb them. I even put a bell on his collar because he'd accidentally sneak up and startle me when I was working from home. Not because he was stealthy. The guy was just naturally quiet when he wasn't bumping into things. The bell helped me keep track of him around the house. Everything changed last winter when we had an unusually cold spell. I live in a fairly standard suburban house, nothing fancy, about 30 years old with all the quirks and issues you'd expect. The freezing temperatures must have driven some field mice to seek shelter, because suddenly I started finding little mouse droppings in my pantry and under the sink. I first noticed something was different about Milo when I came downstairs one morning and found him sitting perfectly still in the kitchen. Usually he'd be meowing for breakfast and weaving between my legs, but that day he was just watching. His eyes were fixed on a tiny gap between the baseboards and the floor. His tail wasn't doing that friendly little flick it usually did when he saw me. It was completely still. "Morning, buddy," I said, but he didn't even acknowledge me. I went about making coffee, and that's when I realized I couldn't hear his bell. I looked over, and he was still there, in the exact same position, his little bell collar completely silent despite his subtle breathing movements. I found it strange, but didn't think much of it. That night, I was woken up around 3 in the morning by a terrible squeaking noise. I rushed downstairs to find Milo in the living room with a mouse, but he wasn't playing with it like cats sometimes do. He was just watching it struggle. The mouse was clearly injured but still alive, and Milo was observing it with this cold, calculated stare I'd never seen before. "Milo," I said, startling him out of whatever trance he was in. He looked up at me, and for a split second, I swear I didn't recognize my own cat. His eyes were different, focused, alien almost. Then he blinked, and he was my goofy Milo again. meowing like he was proud of his catch. I cleaned up the mouse, which died shortly after, and went back to bed feeling unsettled. The next morning, Milo was back to his clumsy self, knocking over my houseplant while chasing a dust bunny, his bell jingling with every movement. Over the next few weeks, I set about sealing any gaps I could find in the house. I stuffed steel wool into holes, caulked cracks, and set a few humane traps just to monitor if we still had mice. Each time I'd seal another potential entry point, I'd notice Milo watching me with that strange intensity. Not his usual curious head tilt, but a calculated observation that made the hair on my arms stand up. As the mouse problem continued, Milo's transformation became more pronounced. During the day, he'd be my same lovable, clumsy cat, but at night, or whenever he sensed a mouse was near, he'd change. His movements would become precise, deliberate. The bell on his collar would go completely silent. I still don't understand how he managed that. I checked the bell multiple times, and it worked perfectly fine when I touched it. But somehow, when Milo was hunting, it made no sound at all. One night, I decided to watch him. I pretended to go to bed, but stayed at the top of the stairs in the darkness. Milo sat in the middle of the living room, completely motionless for nearly 2 hours. I was about to give up when I saw a mouse dart from behind the TV stand. What happened next still haunts me. Milo didn't pounce immediately like you'd expect a cat to do. He waited, perfectly still, as the mouse ventured further into the open. Then he began to move. Not quickly, but with a slow, methodical precision that seemed impossible for my normally uncoordinated pet. His paws made absolutely no sound on the hardwood floor. The bell didn't make a single chime. The mouse never knew he was there until the last second, when Milo was already upon it. The kill was instant. No playing, no toying with his prey like cats often do. Just a swift, efficient execution. Then he looked up directly at me on the stairs, his eyes reflecting the dim light from the kitchen nightlight. I felt a chill run through me as he stared, mouse limp in his jaws like he was showing me what he was capable of. I started having nightmares after that, dreams where I'd wake up in bed to find Milo sitting on my chest, watching me with those hunting eyes. In one particularly vivid nightmare, I was somehow shrunk down to the size of a mouse, running through my own house while something massive stalked me from the shadows. I never saw it clearly, but I knew it was Milo. I woke up sweating, heart pounding, to find him curled up beside me, purring contentedly. By spring, the mouse problem was finally under control. I'd sealed every possible entry point and hadn't seen any evidence of rodents for weeks. Milo gradually returned to his normal self, knocking things over and making me laugh with his uncoordinated leaps. The bell on his collar jingled constantly again, but sometimes I'd catch him sitting absolutely still, staring at a wall or into a dark corner, and that unsettled feeling would come rushing back. In early summer, I planned a solo camping trip. I needed to get away, clear my head, reconnect with nature. I found a remote spot about 50 miles north in the national forest, far enough from the usual campgrounds to offer real solitude. I packed my gear, set up automatic feeders for Milo, and headed out on a Friday afternoon. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I hiked during the day, set up my hammock between trees at night, and enjoyed the sounds of nature. No cell service, no internet, no responsibilities, just me and the wilderness. I felt the tension leaving my body with each passing hour. On the third morning, I woke up just as dawn was breaking. There was that perfect stillness in the air that only exists in the early morning in the woods. As I climbed out of my hammock, I noticed something in the soft dirt around my campsite that made my blood freeze. Tracks. Large, round paw prints that definitely hadn't been there the night before. They circled my hammock completely, multiple times, based on how they overlapped each other. I'm no wildlife expert, but they were unmistakably feline and far too large to be anything but a mountain lion. The realization hit me like a physical blow. While I had been sleeping completely vulnerable in my hammock, a mountain lion had stalked around me, not just passed by, but circled repeatedly, likely watching me sleep, and I hadn't heard a thing, not a twig snap, not a rustle of leaves, nothing. I broke camp in record time, constantly scanning the tree line, the bushes, everywhere. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely roll up my hammock. The entire hike back to my car, I felt eyes on me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I made noise as I walked, talking to myself, singing badly, anything to alert any nearby predators that I was aware and not easy prey. When I finally reached my car, I nearly cried with relief. I drove home with the windows up and the AC blasting, still shaking. Walking into my house that evening, I was greeted by Milo, meowing and rubbing against my legs like he always did. I bent down to pet him, and he purred loudly, his bell jingling as he moved. Everything was normal, until that night. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I realized I couldn't hear Milo's bell anymore. I turned around slowly to find him sitting in the doorway, watching me with that same focused stare I'd seen when he hunted mice. His tail was completely still. The bell was silent. In that moment, I understood something fundamental that I hadn't before. The mountain lion that had stalked me while I slept possessed the same terrifying ability that my house cat did. The power to move in absolute silence before striking. The only difference was size and luck. I had been incredibly, unbelievably lucky. Milo blinked slowly, then turned and walked away, his bell suddenly jingling again as if it had never stopped. I stood frozen in my kitchen, sandwich forgotten, as a new understanding settled over me. The line between my lovable pet and a deadly predator was far thinner than I'd ever realized. I still love Milo. He's still my goofy, clumsy cat most of the time, but I never forget what he really is anymore, and I never, ever go camping alone. Sometimes at night I still wake up to find him watching me from the foot of my bed, perfectly still, his bell silent, and I wonder what he's thinking as he watches me sleep. Story. I'm still trying to process what happened to me last month. I've been hesitant to share this because it sounds crazy, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it. My life had been absolute chaos for months. My company was going through massive layoffs. My landlord kept threatening to sell the building, and I was barely sleeping 3 hours a night. I just needed to get away from everything. No emails, no calls, no people, just silence. I found this cabin rental online that advertised true isolation in the northern woods, about 4 hours from where I live. The listing specifically mentioned no cell service and minimal electricity, exactly what I needed. It wasn't fancy, just a twin bed, small kitchenette, wood-burning stove, and an outhouse about 30 feet from the main structure. The photos showed dense forest surrounding it, and I booked it immediately for a week. When I arrived, the property manager, an older guy named Bill, met me at a gas station about 20 minutes from the cabin. He had me follow his truck down progressively smaller roads until we reached a dirt path where he stopped and handed me a physical map. Follow this to the end. About 2 miles in, keys are under the flower pot. Road gets too rough for my truck. He seemed in a hurry to leave, which I appreciated. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. The cabin was exactly as advertised, small, rustic, and completely surrounded by dense pine forest. After unloading my car and getting settled, I felt the tension in my shoulders loosening for the first time in months. The silence was incredible. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no electronic hums, just occasional bird calls and wind through the trees. The first 2 days were perfect. I hiked the same trail both mornings, following it past some moss-covered boulders and a shallow stream. I read books I'd been putting off for months. I slept deeply without setting an alarm. The isolation was exactly what I needed. Then came the 3rd morning. I woke up just before dawn to what sounded like movement outside. At first, I assumed it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. The cabin was in the middle of the woods after all. But something about the sound seemed off. It wasn't the quick, nervous movements of a deer or the scampering of a smaller animal. It was slower, more deliberate. I got up and peered through the small window next to my bed. The sun wasn't fully up yet, so visibility was poor, but I could make out something moving between the trees about 50 yards from the cabin. It was low to the ground, almost crawling, but it didn't move like any animal I recognized. I couldn't get a clear look at its shape, just a dark mass moving slowly between the tree trunks. I watched until it disappeared into the thicker part of the forest. I told myself it was probably just a bear or something, but deep down I knew bears don't move like that. I spent the rest of the morning feeling uneasy, jumping at every creak or rustling outside. That night, I kept the small hatchet I found in the woodpile next to my bed. The next day, I decided to venture further down the trail than I had before. About a mile in, I came across a small clearing that I hadn't noticed on previous hikes. The grass in the middle was flattened in an unusual pattern, like something had been lying there, but it wasn't a typical deer bed. Around the edges of the clearing, I noticed strange marks in the dirt, wide, shallow depressions that didn't look like footprints or paw prints. They were more like something with no feet had dragged itself through. I should have turned back right then. Something about that clearing felt wrong. The birds weren't singing, and even the insects seemed quiet. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. Instead, I continued hiking for another 30 minutes before heading back to the cabin. That night, the silence that had seemed so peaceful before became oppressive. I kept hearing what sounded like twigs snapping outside, but when I'd look out the window, I couldn't see anything moving. Around midnight, I finally fell into an uneasy sleep. I woke to tapping on the cabin wall. It was rhythmic. Tap, 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 moving slowly around the exterior of the cabin. I lay frozen in bed, straining to follow the sound as it made its way around the structure. The tapping stopped directly beneath my window. I held my breath, clutching the hatchet so tightly my knuckles went white. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard whatever it was move away, the sound of its passage fading into the forest. When morning came, I immediately went outside to check the cabin walls. On the side beneath my window, I found deep scratches in the wood, spaced like fingers but too wide apart to be human. They started about 4 feet up the wall and dragged downward toward the ground. That was enough for me. I started packing my things, ready to cut my trip short and get the hell out of there. But when I went to grab my car keys from the small table where I always left them, they were gone. I tore the cabin apart looking for them, checking every pocket, drawer, and crevice. After an hour of increasingly panicked searching, I happened to look out the window toward my car, and there they were, sitting clearly visible on the passenger seat. My car had been locked the entire time. I always lock it automatically, and I hadn't been near it since the previous afternoon. Someone, or something, had taken my keys and put them in my locked car. I was stuck for at least another night. The cabin was too remote for me to walk out before dark, and I wasn't about to try navigating those woods at night. I spent the day alternating between watching the forest from the windows and trying to find something I could use to break into my own car. The cabin had minimal tools, just the hatchet and some basic kitchen implements. Late that afternoon, I decided to check around the perimeter of the clearing where the cabin sat. About 30 yards into the trees, I found something that made my blood run cold. Strapped to a tree trunk, partially hidden by branches, was what looked like a wildlife camera pointed directly at the cabin. Next to it was a small metal box containing batteries, wires, and what appeared to be a small speaker. Someone had been watching me. The tapping, the missing keys, it was all part of some sick game. I smashed the camera and speaker with the hatchet and retreated to the cabin, barricading the door with the small table and kitchenette chair. I kept the hatchet in my hand as darkness fell, determined to stay awake all night. Around 2 in the morning, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure. Even in the dim moonlight, I could tell it wasn't fully human. It stood too still, its proportions slightly wrong. It was just watching the cabin, not moving, not approaching, just standing there in the shadows between 2 pines. I stared back, afraid to move or make a sound. After about 10 minutes, it simply turned and disappeared into the darkness. The moment the sun rose, I took the hatchet to my car window, reached in to grab my keys, and drove out of there so fast I nearly wrecked on the rough dirt road. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station 3 towns over. When the attendant asked if I was okay, I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. I called the rental company as soon as I got home and tried to explain what had happened. They seemed confused, saying they didn't have any property that matched my description, and they'd never heard of a manager named Bill. When I gave them my reservation number, they had no record of it in their system. I tried finding the listing online again, but it had completely disappeared. I even drove back to the general area a week later with a friend, but we couldn't find the turnoff that led to the cabin. It was like it never existed. Last week, I saw a news article about a hiker who disappeared in the northern woods. The search party found their abandoned campsite with disturbed leaves and what they described as unusual drag marks in the surrounding area. The location was roughly where I think my cabin was. I can't explain what happened to me out there. Was it some elaborate prank, a hallucination from stress and isolation, or something that shouldn't exist in our world? I don't know. But I'm never going back to those woods again, and I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something terrible. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking I hear tapping on my bedroom wall. Story 15. I still can't sleep right when I'm camping. It's been 2 years since that trip to northern Saskatchewan, and I've tried to convince myself it was just a normal bear encounter. But normal doesn't keep you up at night years later. Normal doesn't make you question everything you thought you knew about wildlife. What happened out there was anything but normal. My buddy Aaron and I had been planning this canoe trip for months. We're both experienced outdoorsmen. I've been camping since I was a kid, and Aaron worked as a park ranger for 3 years. We'd done our research, packed properly, and had a bush pilot drop us off at a remote lake about 40 miles from the nearest road. This was pristine wilderness, the kind where you can go days without seeing another human being, which was exactly what we wanted. The first few days were perfect. We paddled during the day, caught fish for dinner, and slept under more stars than you could count. The isolation was exactly what I needed after a stressful year at work. No cell service, no emails, just quiet lakes and endless forest. On our 4th night, we found this beautiful little clearing about 20 yards from the water. Perfect spot for camp, flat ground, good visibility, close to water but not so close we'd get morning fog. We set up our tents about 15 feet apart, hung our food bag from a tree branch away from camp, standard bear precaution, and cooked our dinner on the portable stove. That evening was so peaceful. We sat around our small campfire talking about nothing important while the sun set. I remember feeling completely at ease, that rare feeling where you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Aaron turned in around 10 and I followed about 30 minutes later after making sure the fire was completely out. I fell asleep almost instantly in my small one-person tent. The temperature was perfect, cool enough for a sleeping bag, but not cold. The only sounds were the slight rustle of wind through the trees and the occasional lapping of water against the shoreline. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. What I do know is that something didn't feel right. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize you're not alone? It was like that, but amplified by the fact that we were literally in the middle of nowhere. At first I thought I was imagining things, then I heard it. Deliberate movement outside my tent, not the random sounds of forest nightlife, but something with weight and purpose. My first thought was that Aaron was up taking a leak, but then I realized the sounds were coming from the opposite direction of his tent. I froze, completely still, not even breathing. The rustling continued, circling my tent. Whatever it was big. I could hear heavy breathing now. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure it could be heard through the nylon walls of my tent. Then everything happened at once. The entire left side of my tent suddenly collapsed inward. The weight was enormous, crushing down on my chest and legs. The aluminum tent poles snapped with a sickening crack, and my face was suddenly pressed against the nylon fabric. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was being crushed by something massive. In that moment, I thought I was going to die. Not from being eaten or attacked, but from being suffocated under the weight of whatever was on top of my tent. My lungs burned as I tried to gasp for air. The pressure was unbearable, like having a refrigerator dropped on your chest. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the weight lifted. I heard heavy footsteps moving away from the tent, the sound of something large pushing through undergrowth. I lay there for maybe 5 seconds, stunned, before my survival instinct kicked in. I frantically clawed my way out of the collapsed tent, ripping through the fabric where the zipper was now jammed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip anything. When I finally tumbled out into the open air, I scrambled to my feet, ready to run or fight. I wasn't sure which. That's when I saw it. Just 10 feet away stood a black bear, not a huge one, probably a young male, maybe 250 pounds. In the faint moonlight, I could make out its silhouette clearly. It wasn't charging or growling, it was just standing there, looking at me. Now, I've encountered bears before. They usually either run away immediately or show signs of aggression if they feel threatened. This one did neither. It was watching me with what I can only describe as confusion. I slowly reached down and grabbed the small canister of bear spray attached to my belt that I'd thankfully worn to bed. Old habits. But something told me I wouldn't need it. This bear wasn't acting like a predator. It tilted its head to the side, almost like a dog does when it's trying to understand what you're saying. I swear to God it looked embarrassed, like it had made a mistake and was trying to figure out what happened. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. I didn't move. It didn't move. Then it did something I still can't explain. It took a small step backward, still looking at me, and slowly shook its head. Not aggressively, more like someone would shake their head after realizing they've done something stupid. Then it turned and walked away. Not running in fear, not charging in anger, just calmly walking back into the forest. I stood there, bear spray still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. "Thomas, you okay?" Aaron's voice came from behind me. He was standing outside his tent with his flashlight, looking confused and concerned. I nodded, unable to speak at first. When I finally found my voice, it was shaky. Bear. It crushed my tent. We spent the next hour rebuilding my sleeping area as best we could. The tent was destroyed, poles snapped, fabric torn. We ended up rigging a makeshift shelter using the rainfly and some paracord. Aaron offered to share his tent, but it was barely big enough for one person, let alone 2 grown men. Neither of us went back to sleep that night. We built the fire back up and sat there, talking in low voices, jumping at every sound from the forest. That wasn't normal bear behavior, Aaron kept saying. He'd worked with wildlife for years and couldn't explain what had happened. It's like it was curious about your tent and accidentally fell on it. But that wasn't what bothered me. What I couldn't shake was the way it looked at me afterward. Bears don't show emotion, at least not in ways humans can interpret. But this one did. It looked confused, embarrassed, almost apologetic. When dawn finally came, we debated cutting our trip short. We were still 3 days from our pickup point, and the idea of continuing with a damaged tent wasn't appealing, but the weather was good, and we decided to push on. We packed up quickly, both of us scanning the tree line constantly. For the rest of the trip, I barely slept. Every night, I'd lie awake in that patched-up tent, listening to every sound, expecting the bear to return. It never did. We didn't see another bear or any large wildlife for the remainder of our journey, but the damage was done. Something had changed in me. It's been 2 years, and I've only been camping twice since then, both times in campgrounds with other people nearby. I can't bring myself to go back to remote wilderness, not because I'm afraid of being attacked. I've dealt with that fear my whole life as an outdoorsman. No, what keeps me awake is that moment of connection, that instant when the bear and I looked at each other and both recognized something we shouldn't have. In its eyes, I saw awareness, confusion, regret, emotions that wild animals aren't supposed to have, at least not in ways we can recognize. I've told this story to a few people. Most think I'm exaggerating or that fear distorted my perception. Maybe they're right. Maybe in that moment of terror, my brain interpreted random bear behavior as something more human. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if that bear remembers me too. If somewhere in the forests of Saskatchewan, there's a black bear that still feels bad about crushing some human's weird cave thing. I've spent my life respecting the boundary between wilderness and civilization. I always thought I understood the rules. We visit their world briefly, carefully, then return to ours. But that night something crossed over. That bear showed me how thin that boundary really is, and how quickly it can dissolve when we venture into places where we're just visitors. I still love nature. I still feel drawn to those remote lakes and endless forests. But now I understand that we don't just visit wilderness, we intrude upon it, and sometimes its inhabitants might try to understand us just as desperately as we try to understand them. Story 16. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. Growing up, I rolled my eyes at horror movies and laughed at my friends who got scared during sleepovers. But what happened in my apartment yesterday has completely shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. I'm still shaking as I type this, and I honestly don't know if I'll ever feel safe in my own home again. I live in Oakwood Heights, in an apartment that's been in my family for over 100 years. My great-grandparents bought it back in the 1920s, and it's been passed down through the generations, from them to my grandparents, then to my parents, and now to me. I always loved the idea of living somewhere with so much family history. The old wooden floors that creak in specific spots, the antique doorknobs that need a special touch to turn properly, the way sunlight filters through the original stained glass in the front hallway. It all felt special, like being surrounded by my ancestors. But there's something else here with me. Something I can't explain. I first noticed weird stuff happening when I was 10. I remember standing in the kitchen with my mom when a cup just fell. No one was near it. It wasn't close to the edge. It just toppled over like someone had pushed it. There were other things too. Sounds from the balcony when no one was out there. Doors that would swing open after we definitely closed them. But it all stopped after a few months, and honestly I forgot about it. Kids don't dwell on that kind of thing, you know. But this year it started again, and it's so much worse. Yesterday was when everything escalated beyond anything I could rationalize away. I woke up around 10 in the morning, which is late for me, but I'd been up most of the night before trying to finish a work project. I shuffled to the bathroom, still half asleep, and started my morning routine. I was standing at the sink, just brushing my teeth, when my hairbrush fell off the counter behind me. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I'd left it too close to the edge, but then an hour later, while I was getting ready, my hairspray fell too. Not just fell, it flew off the counter like someone had swiped it. It hit the floor hard and then rolled, I swear to God, rolled across the thick hallway carpet to the other side of the corridor. If you've ever tried to roll something on carpet, you know how impossible that is. The carpet in this place is old and plush, like walking on a sponge. Nothing rolls on it, but that bottle moved like it was on ice. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding. There was no draft, no open window, nothing that could explain it. I picked up the bottle with shaking hands and put it back, then tried to laugh it off. Maybe I bumped the counter, maybe the vibration from the upstairs neighbor. I came up with a dozen explanations, each one more ridiculous than the last. The day went on, and I tried to forget about it. I worked from home, made lunch, called my sister. Normal stuff. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing there. The apartment felt different somehow, colder, more hostile. Around 6 in the evening, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when merchandise from a shelf just fell. Not one item, 3 separate things, one after another. A small vase my mother gave me, a framed photo, and a decorative box. They were all set back from the edge, stable, not going anywhere, and they fell in sequence, like dominoes, except they weren't touching each other. I got up and put everything back, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the photo. I told myself it was just the building settling. This place is old after all. The floors aren't level, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. As night fell, things got worse. I was lying in bed around 11, scrolling through my phone, when I heard footsteps. Not just any footsteps, they were right next to my bed, soft, like a child walking on tiptoes, but unmistakable. My cat Milo, who had been curled up at my feet, suddenly arched his back and hissed at the empty space beside me. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The footsteps circled the bed slowly, deliberately, and then stopped at the head, right next to my pillow, and then, God, I can barely type this, I felt breathing on my ear, warm, rhythmic breathing, like someone was standing over me, their mouth inches from my skin. I threw myself out of bed so fast I almost stepped on Milo. I flipped on every light in the apartment and stood in the middle of my living room, shaking and crying. There was nothing there, no one, just me and my terrified cat. I couldn't leave. Where would I go at that hour? So I sat on the couch with all the lights on, the TV blaring some mindless reality show just for the noise. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up around 3:25 in the morning. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it, the distinct sound of forks and knives clattering against plates in the kitchen, like someone was setting the table or washing dishes. My first thought was that my mom had come over. She has a key for emergencies, but why would she be here in the middle of the night? "Mom," I called out, my voice small and shaky. No answer, just more clinking and clattering. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked toward the kitchen. The hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching out before me like something from a nightmare. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I flipped on the light. Empty, completely empty. The dishes were all still in the cabinets. Nothing had been moved. The noise had stopped the moment I turned on the light. I stood there for a minute, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I turned off the light and went back to the couch, convinced I'd imagined it. But as soon as I sat down, it started again, louder this time, unmistakable. The sound of someone moving around my kitchen, handling my dishes. I got up again, marched back to the kitchen, and flipped on the light. Nothing, absolutely nothing out of place. This happened 4 more times. Each time I'd go to check, the noise would stop. Each time I'd return to the couch, it would start again within minutes. It was like whatever was in my apartment was playing with me, taunting me. By the 5th time, I was crying from fear and frustration. "What do you want?" I shouted into the empty apartment. "Just leave me alone." The noises stopped after that. I sat on the couch until dawn, too terrified to close my eyes. When morning came, I convinced myself I'd had some kind of breakdown from stress and lack of sleep. I cleaned the apartment, opened all the windows to let in fresh air, and even laughed at myself a little. Ghost stories were for kids, right? I managed to get through the day normally. I even felt good enough to cook dinner instead of ordering takeout. Maybe last night had just been my imagination after all. Then, around 9:30 in the evening, as I was washing dishes, I heard a chair rattle behind me. Not just a little movement, it shook violently, like someone had grabbed it and was trying to pull it out from under the table but couldn't quite manage it. Milo, who had been eating from his bowl nearby, took off running like his tail was on fire. He bolted past me and into my bedroom, where I found him later hiding under the bed. I turned around slowly, expecting to see nothing again, but the chair was definitely moved away from the table, twisted at an angle that wasn't possible unless someone had deliberately pulled it out. I backed away from the sink, not taking my eyes off that chair, and moved into the hallway. And that's when I saw it. Standing in the dimly lit corridor, I watched as a small figure, a child maybe 6 years old, ran past my bedroom door and into the kitchen. It wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. I could make out arms, legs, the shape of a small head. It moved like a kid playing tag, quick and light-footed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. I just stood there, watching the empty spot where the child had disappeared, wondering if I'd finally lost my mind completely. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I forced myself to walk to the kitchen. Empty again. Of course it was empty. But the chair that had rattled was now pushed neatly back under the table, as if nothing had happened. I don't know what to do. Is this thing attached to me, to the apartment? What does it want? Is it just a playful spirit? Some long-dead child who once lived here? Or is it something darker, something pretending to be a child to lure me into? What? I'm writing this from a hotel room. I couldn't spend another night there, but I can't stay away forever. It's my home, my family's home for generations. What if this thing follows me wherever I go? I keep thinking about that breathing on my ear, so close, so real. And I can't stop wondering, if I'd turned my head at that moment, what would I have seen? Story 17. I've been debating whether to post this for days now. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I live in Blackwater, a small town about 3 hours from the nearest city. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and not much happens. The isolation never bothered me until last Tuesday night. I was just having a normal evening at home. It was around 11:30, and I was scrolling through my phone, half watching some mindless reality show on TV. My cat, Mochi, was curled up next to me on the couch like she always is. Nothing unusual. Then I heard it, a small voice. At first I thought it was coming from the TV, so I muted it, but the voice continued. It sounded like a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The weirdest part, it was coming from underneath my couch. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was imagining things. You know how your mind plays tricks on you late at night? I've always had an active imagination, so I figured that's all it was. But then Mochi's ears perked up. She jumped off the couch and started staring at the space beneath it, her head moving slightly, as if tracking something moving back and forth. Her tail was all puffed up, and she was making this low, growling noise I'd never heard before. "What the hell is that?" I said out loud, not really expecting an answer. The voice became clearer. It wasn't speaking English or any language I recognized. It was just sounds, like a child babbling or singing to herself. But there was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I stood up and backed away from the couch. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. What was I expecting? That some child was hiding under my furniture? The voice continued, getting slightly louder. I could tell Mochi could hear it too, because she was still tracking whatever it was with her eyes, moving her head back and forth like she was watching something slide from one end of the couch to the other. I've always been sensitive to weird stuff. Even as a kid, I would see and hear things others didn't. My parents just said I had an overactive imagination, but this felt different. This felt real. What makes this even more unsettling is that we're in the middle of Ramadan right now. I'm Muslim, and according to our beliefs during Ramadan, supernatural entities like jinns are supposed to be contained. They're not supposed to be able to interact with our world during this holy month. At least that's what I was taught growing up. I remembered something my grandmother used to say whenever I got scared as a child. She taught me a short prayer for protection. I hadn't recited it in years, but in that moment, the words came back to me. I started saying the prayer under my breath, my voice shaking, and then just like that, the voice stopped. The silence felt even more terrifying somehow. Mochi was still staring at the space under the couch, but she seemed less tense. I didn't dare move for what felt like forever. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and the nearest heavy object, a metal water bottle, and carefully approached the couch. With shaking hands, I turned on my phone's flashlight and looked underneath. Nothing, just some dust bunnies and an old sock I'd been looking for. I couldn't sleep in the living room that night. I locked myself in my bedroom with Mochi, but I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about what had happened, trying to rationalize it. This experience reminded me of something that happened when I was about 12. I was home alone after school, waiting for my mom to get back from work. I clearly heard her voice calling my name from the kitchen. "Lucy, can you come here for a second?" I called back, "Coming, Mom." But as I walked toward the kitchen, I realized the house was empty. My mom wasn't due home for another hour. When I called out again, there was no response. Just silence. I ran outside and waited on the porch until my mom actually came home. But there's a difference between that childhood experience and what happened Tuesday night. When I was a kid, these things would stop as soon as I acknowledged they weren't real. This voice under my couch continued even after I tried to rationalize it. It continued even after I spoke to it. It only stopped when I recited that prayer. Something else has been bothering me. 2 weeks ago, I rearranged my apartment. I moved some furniture around, including a couple of mirrors. There used to be a large mirror on the wall facing the couch, but I moved it to my bedroom. Now that wall is completely bare. Ever since I made those changes, something has felt off about my living room. It's hard to explain. It's like the energy shifted. The room feels colder, emptier somehow. At first, I thought it was just because I was used to seeing my reflection when I looked at that wall, but now I'm wondering if it's something else. I've read stories about mirrors acting as doorways or portals. I never put much stock in those tales, but now I can't stop thinking about them. Did removing that mirror create some kind of opening? Did it allow something to come through? Last night, I couldn't take it anymore. I moved the mirror back to its original spot on the wall facing the couch. It felt right somehow, like I was closing a door that had been left open. The room immediately felt better, warmer, but I'm still sleeping in my bedroom with the door locked. I still can't bring myself to sit on that couch. Every time I walk past it, I feel like something's watching me from underneath. I've lived in this apartment for 3 years without anything strange happening. Why now? What changed? Is it just because of Ramadan? Is it because I moved the mirrors? Or is it something else entirely? I keep thinking about that voice. It sounded so young, so innocent. But there was something underneath the innocence that terrified me, a kind of ancient knowledge that no child should possess. I haven't told anyone else about this. My friends would think I'm crazy. My family would just tell me to pray more. But I know what I heard, I know what I felt, and I know my cat heard and saw it too. The strangest part is that earlier today, when I was cleaning, I've been cleaning obsessively since it happened, as if that would somehow purify my space. I found something under the couch, a small rubber ball, the kind kids play with. It's bright red with blue stars on it. I have no idea where it came from. I don't have kids. None of my friends who visit have kids. That ball shouldn't be there. When I picked it up, it was ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer, not under my couch in my warm apartment. I threw it away immediately, but then I got scared that throwing it away might make whatever is happening worse. So I dug it out of the trash and put it in a box with some salt. Another thing my grandmother taught me, salt purifies and protects. The box is now sitting on top of my refrigerator. I don't know what else to do with it. I can't bring myself to touch the ball again. It's been 5 days since I heard the voice. Nothing else has happened. No more voices, no more strange noises. Mochi seems back to normal, lounging on the windowsill and ignoring the couch completely. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe whatever it was has moved on, but I still can't shake this feeling of being watched, especially when I'm in the living room, especially when I'm near the couch. I've started avoiding sitting there altogether, opting for the floor or the kitchen table instead. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to move out, find a new place without whatever energy or entity is in this one. But another part of me is afraid that it might follow me. That by acknowledging it, by fearing it, I've somehow given it power over me. So for now, I'm staying put. The mirror is back on the wall. The ball is in its box of salt. I recite my grandmother's prayer every night before bed, and I wait, hoping that whatever came into my home that night has found its way back to wherever it came from. But sometimes, when the apartment is completely quiet, when Mochi is asleep and the TV is off, I swear I can still hear faint whispers coming from under the couch. A young girl's voice, singing or talking in a language I don't understand, and each time I pretend not to hear it, hoping that if I ignore it long enough, it will eventually go away. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I feel like I'm losing my mind, but I know what I heard. I know it was real. Whatever was under my couch that night wasn't human, and I'm terrified it might come back. Story 18. It happened 3 nights ago, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. I needed to get it off my chest, and I figured you guys would understand better than most. I've been feeling really burned out from work lately. 60-hour weeks for 2 months straight will do that to you. Last Friday, I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my boss, told him I needed a mental health weekend, and decided to go camping. Nothing fancy, just me and my dog Buck, a 4-year-old German Shepherd mix who's been my buddy through thick and thin. I didn't have time to plan much. Just threw my backpack together with the basics: tarp, sleeping bag, some food, water purifier, the usual stuff. Buck was excited as soon as he saw me packing the gear. He always knows when we're heading out for an adventure. I drove about 2 hours north to this area I'd been to once before with friends. It's not wilderness exactly, more like mixed public land with some logging roads cutting through it. Not the kind of place you need permits for, just somewhere quiet to decompress. It was already late afternoon by the time I got there, around 5 or so. I parked my Subaru at this little pull-out area off a gravel road and hiked in maybe 400 meters. Found this perfect little clearing with 2 sturdy trees spaced just right for my tarp. There was a fallen log that made a natural bench and a flat area perfect for a small fire. The spot was tucked into a slight depression with a gentle slope behind it, which I thought would keep the wind off. I got everything set up pretty quickly, strung the tarp between the trees, laid out my sleeping bag, gathered some firewood. Buck was in heaven, running around, sniffing everything, occasionally bringing me sticks that were way too big for I made a small fire pit with some rocks I found, nothing fancy. As the sun started to go down, I got a small fire going and heated up some chili I'd brought in a thermos. Buck got his kibble with a bit of beef jerky mixed in, his camping treat. It was so peaceful, just the sound of the fire crackling, some birds settling down for the night, and Buck's contented sighs as he lounged next to me. The sky was clear, and I could see stars starting to pop out one by one. I remember thinking how perfect it was, just what I needed after weeks of spreadsheets and Zoom calls and office politics. My phone was off, buried in my backpack. No emails, no texts, no notifications, just me, my dog, and the woods. By 10 o'clock, I was getting pretty tired. The fire had burned down to embers, and I was ready to crash. I did a quick perimeter check, making sure nothing would attract animals in the night, then crawled into my sleeping bag. Buck curled up right beside me, his body warm against my side. I remember looking up at the stars through the gaps in the trees and feeling this wave of contentment wash over me. I must have been dozing off when I first heard it, the sound of an engine revving hard somewhere in the distance. At first I didn't think much of it. Public land, people drive through, no big deal. But then it got louder, much louder, and I realized it was coming from behind the slope at my back, not from the road I'd hiked in from. Then I heard the voices, men's voices, loud and slurred, shouting and laughing over the sound of the engine. The truck was racing, engine screaming as it tore down what must have been another gravel road I hadn't realized was there. I'd checked my hiking app before setting up camp, but I'd only seen the road I came in on. I had no idea there was another road that looped around behind the slope. Buck's head shot up, ears forward, body tense. He let out this low growl that I rarely hear from him, and it sent a chill right through me. The truck seemed to stop maybe 150 meters away, behind the slope where I couldn't see it. The shouting got louder, something about, "Let's try that one," and "Hand me the other one." I was still half asleep, trying to figure out what was going on when the first shots rang out. Bang, 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 bang. 4 shots, fast, like someone squeezing the trigger as quickly as they could. The sound echoed through the trees, impossibly loud in the quiet night. Buck was on his feet in an instant, hackles raised, standing protectively over me. My heart felt like it had stopped for a second, then started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lay there frozen, trying to process what was happening. Then there was laughter, loud, drunk laughter, and more shouting. "You missed by a mile. Let me show you how it's done." And then 3 more shots, slower this time. Bang, bang, bang. That's when it hit me. These guys were shooting guns. They were drunk, and based on where they were and the direction of the sound, they were shooting right toward the area where I was camped. I've never felt fear like that before. It was like ice water in my veins. I couldn't tell if they knew I was there and were deliberately shooting in my direction, or if they had no idea and were just being reckless. Either way, I was in serious danger. I slid out of my sleeping bag as quietly as I could, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grab my stuff. Buck stayed right by my side, completely silent now, but alert to every move I made. I shoved my sleeping bag into its stuff sack without bothering to roll it properly, grabbed my backpack, and shoved in anything important. Left the food hanging in a tree. I wasn't going back for it. More shots rang out, and I heard something whiz through the trees overhead. A bullet, an actual bullet, had just passed over me. I nearly threw up from fear right then and there. I put Buck on his shortest leash, which he hates, but I needed him close. I took down the tarp as quietly as I could and kicked dirt over the remains of my fire. The whole time the men kept shooting, sometimes in bursts, sometimes single shots. I heard bottles breaking too. They were shooting at bottles or cans, using them as targets. "Hey, try that big pine over there," one of them shouted, and my blood ran cold. I had no idea which pine he meant, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I crouched low, backpack on, Buck right against my leg, and started moving as fast as I could through the trees back toward my car. I tried to stay behind the thickest trunks, using them as cover, moving from one to the next. The shots continued behind me, sometimes seeming to get closer, sometimes farther away, as if they were turning and shooting in different directions. Every step, every snapping twig under my feet made me wince. I was sure they'd hear me, turn their guns in my direction. Buck was amazing. He seemed to understand the danger perfectly. He stayed right with me, silent and focused, occasionally looking back toward the sound of the shots. I had to cross a small open space to get back to the trail that would lead to my car. I hesitated at the edge of the trees, listening. The shooting had paused. I could hear them talking, laughing, but couldn't make out the words. Then the truck's engine revved again. Were they leaving or moving closer? I didn't wait to find out. I ran across the open space as fast as I could while staying low, Buck right beside me. As soon as I hit the trees on the other side, I heard more shots. They were moving, shooting as they went. I found the trail and moved as quickly as I could while trying to stay quiet. My back was crawling with the feeling that at any second a bullet might hit me. Every snap of a branch made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone with a gun. The 400 meters back to my car felt like 4 kilometers. I kept thinking I was going the wrong way, that I'd missed the pullout somehow. The forest seemed completely different in the dark, with the sound of gunshots echoing through the trees. Finally, I saw my car. I've never been so happy to see my beat-up old Subaru. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them and had to feel around in the dirt. Buck jumped in as soon as I opened the door, and I threw my backpack in after him. I started the car but didn't turn on the headlights. I just put it in reverse, backed onto the gravel road, and drove away as quietly as possible. I didn't turn my headlights on until I was at least a kilometer away, constantly checking my rearview mirror for signs of the truck following me. I was afraid they might have heard my car and decided to come after me. Every set of headlights I saw on the road made my heart race until I confirmed it wasn't a truck. It wasn't until I hit the main highway that I finally let myself breathe normally. Buck was still on high alert, standing on the passenger seat, looking out all the windows. I drove straight home, 3 hours with the radio off, jumping at every sudden sound. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. Every time I start to drift off, I hear those gunshots again. I keep thinking about what could have happened. A stray bullet. Them finding me. What if Buck had barked? I reported it to the local sheriff's department the next morning, but I don't think anything will come of it. Public land, no description of the truck, no license plate. The deputy just said they'd keep an eye out and reminded me to be careful out there. I've always felt safe in the outdoors. I've camped alone dozens of times, but now I can't stop thinking about how vulnerable I was, how a peaceful spot turned into a nightmare in seconds because of other people's recklessness. I've been camping my whole life, and I've never bothered to check for all access roads or consider escape routes. That's changed now. buck seems to have bounced back already, but every time I look at my camping gear in the corner of my apartment, I feel this knot in my stomach. I know I'll go back out eventually. The woods have always been my sanctuary. But I'll never again assume I'm alone out there, or that everyone else in the wilderness is there for the same peaceful reasons I am. I'm still trying to process it all. Sometimes I wonder if I overreacted. Maybe they were just target shooting and had no idea I was there. But then I remember the sound of that bullet whizzing overhead, and I know it was as close a call as it felt. Story 19. I still feel sick thinking about that Easter broadcast from 21 years ago. It was 2002, and I was working as a news producer at WPEN in Middlebrook. Small-town Pennsylvania TV isn't exactly glamorous, but it was steady work, and I liked most of my co-workers. Easter weekend was usually pretty laid back at the station. We'd run some special programming, cover the town egg hunt, then coast through the holiday with pre-recorded segments. That Easter Sunday, I wasn't even supposed to be there. My daughter had a stomach bug, but my husband insisted he could handle it so I could finish up some work. I wish I'd just stayed home. Around 7 in the evening, I was in the break room grabbing coffee when I heard shouting from the control room. At first, I thought someone had screwed up a commercial break timing, which happens sometimes. But when I walked in, everyone was staring at the monitors with these horrified expressions. Our scheduled program, some family movie special, was gone. Instead, there was this figure. Just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Someone wearing this dirty off-white rabbit mask with these huge black eyes that seemed to stare right through the screen. The mask had these long floppy ears that hung down past the person's shoulders and dark stains around the mouth area that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The figure was sitting in what looked like a basement or cellar with concrete walls. Behind them was this collage of newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age, pinned to the wall with red thumbtacks. The lighting was awful, just this single bulb swinging slightly overhead, creating these shifting shadows. "What the hell is this?" I remember asking. Nobody answered me. We were all just frozen. Our technical director, Dave, was frantically trying to cut the feed, but nothing was working. "It's not coming from our server," he kept saying. "Someone's hijacked the signal." For about 30 seconds, the rabbit figure just sat there, barely moving except for slight tilts of the head, like it was studying the audience. Then it slowly raised a gloved hand and held up what looked like a child's Easter basket. Inside weren't eggs or candy, just torn pieces of fabric in pastel colors. That's when it made that throat-slashing gesture, drawing a finger across its neck, slow and deliberate. I remember feeling physically ill. The station manager immediately called the police, but we all kept watching, horrified but unable to look away. Then it leaned forward, I'll never forget this, and whispered in this raspy voice, "Some secrets stay buried, others come back every spring." The voice was distorted, either electronically or through the mask, making it impossible to tell if it was male or female. The feed cut to different footage then, surveillance video of families at what was clearly last year's Middlebrook Easter egg hunt. The camera lingered on specific children, following them as they searched for eggs. Then it showed footage of those same families' houses, clearly taken from outside, of people moving behind windows, completely unaware they were being watched. I recognized most of those families. My own daughter had been at that egg hunt. The broadcast lasted almost 4 minutes before our engineers finally managed to override it. By then, our phone lines were jammed with panicked calls from viewers. The police arrived within minutes, and the FBI was called in by morning. I stayed at the station until 3 in the morning, working with investigators, reviewing our security footage. That's when we first noticed Thomas Reichman acting strangely. Thomas was a junior technician who'd been with us maybe 6 months. Quiet guy, kept to himself, but good at his job. The security cameras showed him entering restricted areas of the station earlier that day, which wasn't part of his usual routine. When investigators pulled the newspaper clippings from the video still frames, what they found was chilling. Each article was about a child who had disappeared around Easter, going back to 1997. 5 children in total, from counties surrounding Middlebrook. None of the cases had been solved. The articles had been arranged in a specific pattern on the wall, almost like a calendar, with the most recent disappearance at the top. The police brought Thomas in for questioning the next day. I wasn't there, but I heard he seemed genuinely confused and scared. He denied any involvement. They didn't have enough to hold him, so they let him go, but kept him under surveillance. 2 days later, he vanished. Just packed a bag and slipped away when the officer watching his apartment took a bathroom break. They found his wallet a week later, abandoned at a rest stop on Interstate 80. Inside was a note with coordinates and a date, April 3rd, 1985. When investigators checked, they found reports of another broadcast interruption on that date at a different small station in Ohio. Same rabbit mask, same setup. That broadcast had been mostly forgotten. No internet back then to preserve it, just a few witness statements in a police file. The FBI expanded their investigation and discovered 13 cases spanning 4 decades, all with the same pattern. Children disappearing on Easter weekends, all unsolved. The rabbit broadcast would appear in a town nearby, but always after the disappearance, never before. Like it was gloating. I couldn't sleep for weeks after that. I installed new locks, security cameras, the works. My husband thought I was overreacting until the FBI showed us the enhanced footage from the broadcast. One of the newspaper clippings had my daughter's school photo circled in red. She hadn't disappeared like the others, but she'd been marked somehow. We moved away from Middlebrook 3 months later. I couldn't bear to stay. Many families did the same. The Easter egg hunt that year was cancelled, and when they tried to bring it back the following year, only a handful of children showed up. For years, the case went cold. The FBI had no leads. Thomas Reichman was never found, though most people in town believed he was just another victim, not the perpetrator. The theory was that he had discovered something about the broadcasts and was silenced before he could reveal it. Then in 2013, 11 years after the broadcast, a young couple renovating an old Victorian house on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the station, knocked down a wall in the basement and found a hidden room. Inside was a table with editing equipment, old VHS tapes, and hanging on a hook, a rabbit mask identical to the one from the broadcast. Inside the mask, written in what turned out to be red marker, not blood, were the names of the 13 missing children, plus 3 more names nobody recognized, and one last name, someone who still lived in Middlebrook, Miranda Keller, a woman in her 30s who'd grown up in town and now worked at the library. When questioned, Miranda broke down and revealed something she'd never told anyone. When she was 7 years old, in 1983, a man in a rabbit mask had tried to lure her into a van during an Easter celebration. She'd escaped and told her parents, but they'd dismissed it as an overactive imagination, a misunderstanding about someone in an Easter costume. The house with the hidden room had changed owners 8 times since 1983. Property records showed it had been vacant around each of the disappearances and during the 2002 broadcast. The FBI never found enough evidence to identify the person behind it all. Easter in Middlebrook is different now. People still celebrate, but they're careful. They draw their curtains. They vary the times of their gatherings so no pattern can be established. The egg hunts are held indoors, at random locations announced only hours before. I went back to Middlebrook last year to clean out my parents' house after my father passed away. The town feels haunted now, especially in spring. I stayed through Easter weekend, and I swear I could feel eyes on me the whole time. The current station manager at WPEN told me they still receive a single anonymous postcard every Easter, always with the same message. Some secrets stay buried, others come back every spring. The most disturbing part? Thomas Reichman's body was never found. But every few years, someone claims to have seen him in a neighboring town, just watching children play, always around Easter, always from a distance, never approaching, just watching. I don't know if it was Thomas all along, if he was involved, or if he discovered something that got him killed. I don't know if the person in the rabbit mask is still out there, but every Easter I keep my daughter close, even though she's an adult now. I keep the curtains drawn. and I never ever watched local television during the holiday weekend. Sometimes I wonder if the whole thing was meant as a warning rather than a threat. What was coming back every spring? Who was buried and who returned? 21 years later, and I still jump when I see Easter decorations in stores. Some things get under your skin and never leave. And that rabbit mask with those empty black eyes, that's something I'll never forget as long as I live. Story 20. I've been putting off writing about this for 10 years now. I guess the anniversary has me thinking about it again. What happened to us at Lake Lanier back in July 2013 still doesn't make any sense. I've gone through therapy, talked to researchers, even participated in that university study, but nobody has real answers. I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar or can help make sense of it. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway with friends. My husband Tyler and I went camping with two other couples, Marcus and Julia Whitman, who we knew from college, and David and Karen Chen, our neighbors. We were all in our early 30s, decent jobs, no kids yet, and we wanted one last summer adventure before Marcus and Julia moved to Seattle. Lake Lanier seemed perfect, close enough to Atlanta, but far enough to feel like we were getting away. Tyler found this secluded peninsula that wasn't on the main camping maps. It took some off-roading to get there, but the isolation was exactly what we were looking for. I remember joking that it was perfect for skinny dipping since there were no other campers around. God, I wish we'd just gone to a regular campground with other people nearby. When we arrived Friday afternoon, it was gorgeous. A small wooded peninsula jutting out into the lake with a perfect clearing for our tents. While setting up camp, Tyler was hammering in a tent stake when he hit something hard. He dug around it and pulled up chunks of concrete with rebar sticking out. "Guys, check this out," he called. "I think we're camping on top of something." Marcus came over and examined it. "Old foundation, maybe? I know they flooded a bunch of towns when they made this lake." I remember David saying, "That's kind of creepy, camping on someone's old house." But we laughed it off. Karen suggested we take a picture for Instagram with the caption, "Squatters' Rights." It all seemed so innocent then. After setting up camp, David and Karen wanted to go diving. They were both certified and had brought their gear. The rest of us planned to swim near the shore and get the campfire going. They were gone for about 45 minutes before they came rushing back to shore, looking shaken. Karen could barely catch her breath as she pulled off her mask. "You guys won't believe what's down there. There's a whole street, like a preserved street with buildings." David nodded, still half in his wetsuit. "It's about 60 feet down. The visibility isn't great, but you can make out the outlines of structures. There's even a small cemetery." "A cemetery?" Julia asked. "Like underwater graves?" "Yeah," Karen said. "Headstones, some crosses. It's surreal." Tyler laughed nervously. "Well, that explains the foundation pieces. We're literally camping on top of a drowned town." David pulled out his GoPro. "I got some footage. The weird thing is," he hesitated, "some of the graves look disturbed." "What do you mean, disturbed?" I asked. "The silt around some markers was kicked up, like something had been moving there recently," Karen explained. "But not like something went down to it, more like something came up," David finished. We all went quiet for a moment. Marcus broke the silence with a forced laugh. "Maybe it was just fish or currents or something." Karen shook her head. "We dive a lot. This looked different." We tried to shake off the weird feeling as evening approached. We grilled burgers, drank beer, told stories around the campfire. It was a beautiful night, clear sky, almost full moon, the lake water still and reflective. By midnight, we were all pretty tipsy and decided to turn in. I remember waking up at what felt like the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure what woke me. Then I heard it, a rhythmic splashing sound coming from the lake. I nudged Tyler awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a moment. Probably just fish jumping. But it wasn't random like fish. It was steady, methodical. Splash, pause, splash, pause, and it seemed to be moving. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. The moon was bright enough that I could see the water, but I couldn't spot what was making the noise. The splashing continued, circling our peninsula counterclockwise. I was about to wake the others when Marcus poked his head out of his tent. "You guys hearing this too?" One by one, everyone woke up. We gathered at the shore, watching as the splashing continued its circuit around us. We shined our flashlights toward the sound, but never caught sight of anything. "Could it be a boat?" Julia suggested. "No engine sound," Tyler said. "And who'd be boating in circles at this hour?" We stood there for maybe 20 minutes, watching and listening as whatever it was completed 3 full circles around our peninsula. Then it stopped. The silence felt heavier than the splashing had. We nervously joked about it being the lake monster and were about to head back to our tents when Karen grabbed my arm. "Listen," she hissed. At first I didn't hear anything. Then I realized there was a faint sound coming from the far end of the peninsula where it connected to the mainland. A wet, squishy sound, like footsteps, lots of footsteps. David checked his watch. "It's 2:17, he whispered, as if that mattered. The footsteps got louder. It sounded like dozens of people walking slowly up from the shoreline. Wet, heavy steps moving through the underbrush toward our campsite. We all froze. Marcus whispered, "Should we call out? Maybe it's other campers." "At 2 in the morning, Julia hissed back. Then the footsteps stopped, hovering at the edge of our clearing, just beyond where our flashlights could reach. We stood there, 6 adults paralyzed with fear, for what felt like forever. Then, as suddenly as they had approached, the footsteps retreated, back toward the shore, with the same wet, squishy sound. We heard splashes as whatever they were returned to the water, then silence. None of us slept after that. We huddled around the rekindled campfire, too afraid to be alone in our tents. When dawn finally broke, Tyler and Marcus went to investigate where we'd heard the footsteps. "Amelia, you need to see this," Tyler called, his voice strange. I walked over and felt my stomach drop. There were footprints. Dozens of them leading from the water's edge up to where our campsite began, then back to the water. But they weren't normal footprints. They looked both fresh and ancient at the same time, defined enough to see they were human feet, but with an odd weathered quality, like fossils. "This doesn't make sense," I said, kneeling to examine one. The impression was about 9 inches long, definitely human, but the texture was wrong. It looked almost mineralized. When we returned to camp, Karen was frantically searching through our supplies. "Someone went through our stuff," she said. "The cooler was opened." "Maybe raccoons," Marcus suggested. Karen shook her head. "The combination lock was still on it, just unlocked, and nothing's been eaten or torn apart. It's all just sorted." She was right. Inside the cooler, our food had been meticulously organized by type. Meats together, vegetables together, condiments lined up by size. "Guys," Julia called from the shoreline, "you need to see this too." We followed her voice and found our personal items. Watches, Julia's necklace, Tyler's pocket knife, Marcus's wallet, Karen's hairbrush, David's sunglasses, and my bracelet, arranged in a perfect line along the shore. Each item was exactly 7 feet from the water and precisely 12 feet apart from the next item. None of us had left these things outside. David grabbed his diving gear. "I need to go back down there." Karen immediately protested, but he insisted. "I need to see those graves again. This time, I'll record everything." Against our better judgment, we let David and Karen dive again while the rest of us packed up camp. I wanted to leave immediately, but David was determined, and we couldn't exactly abandon them. They returned an hour later. David was visibly shaken as he connected his GoPro to his laptop. "You have to see this," he said, his voice trembling. The footage showed the underwater street again, clearer this time in the morning light, David narrated as we watched. "This was the main street, I think. Those are buildings on either side, and there's the cemetery." The cemetery looked small, maybe 15 to 20 graves with simple markers. As David's camera panned, I noticed movement at the edge of the frame. "Wait, what was that?" I asked. David rewound and played it in slow motion. There, at the periphery of the frame, was a human-shaped figure. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, like it was being pulled by currents, except it was moving against the visible water flow. As David's camera continued to pan, we saw more figures, 3, maybe 4, moving in the background. "I didn't see them when I was down there," David said quietly. "Then came the moment that still haunts my nightmares." As David turned to swim back toward shore, the camera briefly captured a figure directly in front of him. It was humanoid but bloated and decomposed, its features blurred by time and water, and it turned, deliberately turned, to face the camera. We all screamed. David slammed the laptop shut. "We're leaving." "Now," Marcus said, and no one argued. But as we frantically packed the last of our gear, the lake began to behave strangely. The water started moving in rhythmic pulses, like something massive was breathing underneath. Our electronics went haywire, phones cycling on and off, watches resetting, Marcus's portable speaker turning on by itself and emitting bursts of static. David, who'd been in the Navy, suddenly went still. "That's Morse code," he said, listening to the pattern of static. He grabbed a notepad and started writing down letters. When he was done, he showed us what he'd decoded. 07/18/1952. "What is that?" Julia asked. "A date," Tyler said. "July 18th, 1952. David's speaker continued its strange broadcast, and he decoded more dates, all from the early 1950s. Karen looked them up on her phone during moments when it worked. "These are when they were flooding the valley to create Lake Lanier," she said, her voice hollow. "These dates correspond to when different areas were submerged." By now it was evening again, but none of us suggested staying another night. As we made our final preparations to leave, David checked his watch. "It's 2:17, he said, "the same time as last night." We threw the last of our gear into our cars and sped away from that place, not looking back. It wasn't until we reached a gas station 20 miles away that we realized we'd left our extinguished campfire without properly breaking it down. 2 weeks later, Marcus went back with a park ranger to make sure we hadn't caused any fire hazard. What he found makes even less sense than everything else. Our campfire had been reconstructed, not just rebuilt, but the stones and ash had been arranged to form what looked like a miniature map of the town that lay beneath the lake. At the exact spot where our campsite had been, someone had placed a small pyramid of pebbles. The authorities got involved after Marcus reported this. Researchers collected samples of those strange footprints before they disappeared. They found microbial communities in them that typically take decades to develop. The university study I mentioned earlier analyzed David's underwater footage frame by frame and found details none of us had noticed, like how the figures in the background all seemed to be moving toward the surface, or how the one that faced the camera had something clutched in its hand that looked like an old photograph. Lake Lanier now has a permanent research exclusion zone around that peninsula. No camping, no diving, no boats within half a mile. They say it's for environmental research, but we know better. It's been 10 years, and I still wake up sometimes at exactly 2:17 in the morning, thinking I hear wet footsteps approaching my bedroom. The 6 of us have stayed close. We're bonded by something we can't explain to anyone else. David and Karen never went diving again. Marcus and Julia postponed their move to Seattle for a year because they were too traumatized to handle any major life changes. As for me and Tyler, we still can't bring ourselves to go camping anywhere, and I never, ever swim in lakes anymore. I don't know what happened to us at Lake Lanier. I don't know who those people were beneath the water, or why they visited us, or what they wanted. All I know is that something is there. Something that remembers being human once, something that's still aware enough to reach out to the living world above. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that they're still waiting for us to return. Story 21. I've hesitated posting this for weeks, wondering if anyone would believe me, but I need help. I'm typing this with shaky hands after another sleepless night, hoping someone has experienced something similar. It all started in early July, just a few weeks ago. I live in an older house in northeast Portland, the kind with character and probably too many DIY electrical jobs from previous owners. At first, I noticed my LED bulbs acting weird. They'd randomly shift from warm to cool white while I was sitting in the room. Not all at once, just one fixture at a time, like someone was playing with a dimmer switch that doesn't exist. I figured it was just faulty wiring or maybe a power surge issue. Portland's infrastructure isn't exactly top-notch, and we'd had some storms recently. I even called my buddy who knows electrical stuff, and he suggested I might need to replace some fixtures or check the grounding. Then the lights started turning on by themselves, not flickering, full-on switching from off to on when I was nowhere near the switch. The first time it happened, I was in the kitchen making dinner when my bedroom light flipped on. I remember the chill that ran up my spine when I walked down the hallway and saw it. I hadn't been in there for hours. I told myself it was an electrical issue, maybe a short circuit. But deep down, something felt different, wrong. Like when you feel someone staring at you from across a room. About a week after the lights started acting up, I felt it for the first time. I was drifting off to sleep, that weird space between awake and dreaming, when I felt something brush against my arm. It was gentle, like fingers trailing across my skin. I jerked awake, heart pounding, and turned on the lamp. Nothing. My cat was asleep at the foot of the bed, and my bedroom door was closed. The next night, it happened again. This time, I felt what seemed like a hand pressing gently on my chest. Not threatening, almost intimate. I know how this sounds, but I didn't feel scared at first, just intensely curious. I've always been the type to investigate weird stuff rather than run from it. That was my first mistake. By the third night, the touches had become more deliberate. I'd feel pressure moving across my body in ways that were, well, sexual. I know it sounds messed up, but it wasn't unpleasant initially, more confusing than anything. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis before, and I was fully conscious during these episodes. I could move if I wanted to. I just didn't at first. I started researching, spent hours online reading about electromagnetic fields, infrasound, and how they can affect human perception. I bought an EMF detector from Amazon and found crazy high readings near my bed and in the corners of my bedroom. I felt validated. This was something real, something I could measure. I set up my phone to record while I slept. The footage showed nothing unusual visually, but the audio picked up strange humming sounds that would grow louder around 3 in the morning. Sometimes there'd be a strange static noise right before I felt the touching begin. That's when I made my second mistake. I started talking to it. Not out loud at first, just in my head, asking questions, wondering what it wanted. Why me? Why now? The response was immediate and terrifying. A sudden pressure around my throat, not enough to choke me, but enough to make me panic. After that night, everything changed. The encounters became aggressive. What had been gentle touches turned painful. Sharp pricks like needles in my sides, electric shocks on the bottoms of my feet that would jolt me awake. The worst was the tinnitus. A high-pitched whine that would start softly and grow until it felt like my eardrums would burst. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 2 weeks now. Every time I start to drift off, something wakes me. Sometimes it's physical, the feeling of weight pressing down on my mattress, like someone's walking across my bed. Other times it's auditory, whispers just on the edge of comprehension, or that goddamn ringing in my ears. I'm exhausted all the time now. My coworkers have noticed, asked if I'm sick. I've called in sick 3 times this week alone because I can barely function. My body feels drained, like whatever this is feeding off my energy. I don't even recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My skin is pale, and I have dark circles under my eyes that no amount of coffee can fix. Last weekend, in desperation, I tried smudging the house with white sage. Big mistake. That night was the worst yet. The pressure on my chest was so intense I could barely breathe. I felt scratching sensations all over my body. Not enough to leave marks, but enough to make me feel like I was losing my mind. I tried meditation next, thinking if I could center myself, maybe I could push this thing away through mental strength or something. But every time I close my eyes and try to focus, the ringing in my ears gets so loud I can't concentrate. It's like it knows what I'm trying to do and is actively fighting against it. 3 days ago, I was at my breaking point. I found someone online, a spiritual healer who claimed she could remove attachments remotely. I was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. I paid her $200 for a distance clearing. She told me she sensed a non-human entity that was attracted to my energetic field and promised she had removed it. For about 6 hours after our Zoom session, I actually felt better. The air in my house seemed lighter. I even managed to nap for 20 minutes without disturbance. Then, as the sun set, everything came back with a vengeance. The lights in my entire house went crazy. On, off, dimming, brightening. My TV turned on by itself, cycling through channels. My phone died even though it was at 80% battery. And the touching, it was everywhere at once, like multiple hands all over my body. I ran outside and sat in my car for hours, too terrified to go back in. When I finally did, exhausted and freezing at 3 in the morning, I found every cabinet in my kitchen open, every single one. I know what some of you are thinking. I've thought it too. I have a history with substances, mainly weed and occasionally something stronger in my younger days. And yes, I've dealt with depression for years, but I've been clean for 8 months now, and my therapist, who I see weekly, has commented multiple times on how well I've been doing. I'm on a low dose of an SSRI that hasn't changed in over a year. This isn't coming from inside my head. Last night was the final straw. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes, when I felt the mattress depress beside me. Not subtly, like a full human weight sitting on the edge of my bed. I froze, unable to look. Then I felt fingers, ice cold, trace up my arm to my shoulder. I jerked away and fumbled for the light switch. As the light came on, I swear I saw a shadow move across the wall. Not a normal shadow cast by something in the room, but a dark mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. I haven't slept since. I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now, jumpy at every sound. The lights have flickered twice while I've been writing this. My phone keeps showing phantom notifications, the screen lighting up with no actual alerts. I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried protection rituals I found online. I've played religious prayers on YouTube. I've begged it to leave. Nothing works. In fact, everything I try seems to make it stronger, more present. The worst part is that I don't think it wants to harm me. Not completely. It's like it's feeding off my fear and energy. It keeps me awake, keeps me afraid, but never pushes far enough to make me leave permanently. It's like it needs me here. I called my landlord yesterday, asking about the history of the house. He seemed uncomfortable with my questions and finally admitted there had been issues with previous tenants, but nothing he could legally be held responsible for. When I pressed him, he hung up. My friends think I'm having a mental breakdown. Maybe I am. But even if this is all somehow in my head, it feels real. The physical sensations, the exhaustion, the fear, it's all real to me. Right now, as I'm typing, the light above me is slowly dimming. My hands are shaking so badly I keep having to fix typos. There's a pressure building in the room, like before a thunderstorm, but more focused, directed at me. I'm at the end of my rope. I can't keep living like this, but I can't afford to break my lease and move. And honestly, I'm not convinced it wouldn't follow me anyway. It feels attached to me specifically, not the house. If anyone has experienced anything like this or knows what might be happening, please help. I need practical advice, something rooted in the real world that I can try. I've thought about having the electrical system completely checked or maybe testing for carbon monoxide, though I don't have any of the classic symptoms of poisoning. Oh God, something just touched the back of my neck. I'm not alone in this room. I can feel. Story 22. I've never shared this publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or has advice. I'm still trying to process what happened at my grandparents' house. My grandparents' house has always been off. I can't remember a time when it wasn't. Even as a little kid, I knew something wasn't right about that place, especially the back bedrooms and hallway. The feeling is so intense that we've had 3 different dogs over the years, including a massive German shepherd with severe separation anxiety, who flat out refuse to go down that hallway. They'll whine, pull back, or just sit and stare down it like they're seeing something we can't. I remember my cousin Mark literally running out of the house when he was 17 because he needed to use the bathroom, but the only available one was down that hallway. He said, "I'll piss in the bushes before I walk down there." My Aunt Sylvia refuses to visit overnight anymore after she felt someone sit on her bed at 3 in the morning when everyone else was asleep. Growing up, I always got stuck in what I now call the worst room in the house. It's at the very end of that hallway, the furthest from the living room and kitchen. The atmosphere in there feels heavy, like the air is thicker somehow. I'd lie awake feeling like someone was standing over my bed watching me. Sometimes I'd pull the covers over my head like a little kid, even when I was 16, 17 years old. The incidents were small at first. The shower curtain would suddenly yank closed while I was in the bathroom, even though the window wasn't open and there was no draft. I'd hear footsteps pacing up and down the hallway at night when everyone was asleep. Sometimes I'd wake up to find my bedroom door wide open when I distinctly remembered closing it before bed. My grandparents normalized it. Grandpa would say, "Oh, the house is just settling," or "It's probably the pipes." But we all knew it wasn't. We just didn't talk about it. Things started getting worse about 6 months ago. My grandmother called me one afternoon, her voice shaking. She said she'd been alone in the house, reading in her favorite chair, when all the cabinet doors in the kitchen flew open simultaneously. Not just 1 or 2, all of them. She was terrified. A week later, my grandfather was in the shower when he felt someone tug his arm hard enough to leave marks. There was no one there. My grandmother finally asked me to do something about it. "Isabel," she said, "can you make it leave? You've always been sensitive to these things." I'm not sure why she thought I could help, but I felt responsible somehow. These are my grandparents. I had to try. I did my research. I bought sage bundles, incense, holy water from a local church. I went through each room, especially focusing on that hallway and the back bedrooms. I spoke firmly, saying things like, "You are not welcome here. This is not your home. You need to leave now." I opened windows to let the energy out, like all the websites suggested. It seemed to work at first. The house felt lighter. My grandmother said she slept through the night for the first time in months. Even I felt comfortable enough to stay over in the worst room that weekend. We all thought maybe it was over. We were wrong. I'd spent months working on a painting for my grandparents' wedding anniversary. It was huge, 4.5 feet long by 4 feet wide, a pair of lovebirds surrounded by the flowers from my grandmother's wedding bouquet. I'd put my heart into it, working on it whenever I had free time between my shifts at the hospital. When I finally gave it to them 3 weeks ago, my grandmother cried. My grandfather, who never shows emotion, had to turn away to wipe his eyes. Since they're both in their 80s, they couldn't hang something that heavy, so we leaned it carefully against the wall above their fireplace. It was stable, we made sure of it. It sat there undisturbed for weeks. Then last Tuesday happened. I'd gone over to have dinner with them. Everything was normal. We ate my grandmother's pot roast, talked about my cousin's new baby, watched some game show my grandfather likes. I left around 9, giving them both hugs and promising to come back on the weekend. At 11:23 that night, my phone rang. It was my grandmother, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "The painting," she kept saying. "Your painting." I drove over immediately. When I walked in, they were both in the living room, still in their pajamas. My grandfather looked pale. He just pointed toward the fireplace. My painting was on the floor, face down. But that doesn't begin to describe what had happened to it. It hadn't just fallen. It looked like it had been violently thrown. It had landed about 6 feet from where it had been leaning. But what made my stomach turn were the punctures. The canvas had 4 distinct holes punched through it, as if someone had stabbed it with something narrow but strong. The wooden frame, solid oak that I'd specifically chosen for its durability, was warped and splintered. We heard a crash, my grandmother said, her voice still shaking, like someone had thrown it with all their might. What made it even stranger were the glass bird figurines that had been sitting on the mantel in front of the painting. They'd been knocked down too, but not a single one was broken. They were just scattered across the carpet, completely intact. My grandfather and I examined every inch of that room looking for something, anything that could explain what happened. There was nothing, no earthquake. I checked online immediately. No heavy trucks passing by that could have caused vibrations. The painting hadn't been balanced precariously. It had been stable for weeks, and those punctures, they went all the way through both the canvas and the wooden frame behind it. Something would have needed incredible force to do that. My grandfather, always practical, tried to rationalize it. Maybe the frame had a weakness, he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew what this was. The next day, my grandfather tried to repair the painting. His hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but he spent hours meticulously taping the canvas back together from behind, trying to line up the tiers. The frame was too damaged to fix completely. It remains warped on one side. What haunts me isn't just the damage itself, but the timing and specificity of the attack. It happened exactly 4 days after I had performed the cleansing ritual, and it wasn't just any object in the house that was targeted. It was something I had created with love, something meaningful to all of us. The entity, and yes, I'm convinced now that's what we're dealing with, was sending me a message. It was saying, "I'm still here, and I don't appreciate what you tried to do." I've been researching obsessively since then. This thing has been in that house since I was a baby. My earliest memories include that feeling of being watched. It's not going to leave easily, and now it's made it very clear that it resents attempts to remove it. What scares me most is that nothing else in the room was disturbed that night. Not the delicate china teacup my grandmother had left on the side table, not the stack of mail balanced on the edge of the bookshelf, not even the lightweight paper lampshade that wobbles if you walk past it too quickly. Just my painting, violently attacked and punctured. My grandparents are too old to move. This is their home of 45 years. But I'm terrified of what might happen next. If this thing can physically affect objects with such force, what else is it capable of? I don't know what to do. The standard cleansing methods only seem to anger it. My grandmother now says she hears whispering in her ear when she's alone in the kitchen. My grandfather woke up yesterday to find every single family photo in the hallway turned to face the wall. I'm staying with them tonight. I brought my sleeping bag and I'm camping out in the living room. I refuse to sleep in the worst room again. My grandmother seems relieved to have me here, but my grandfather keeps looking down that hallway with an expression I've never seen on his face before. Something in that house doesn't want us there, and after what it did to my painting, I'm afraid of what it might do next.